Chapter 686. Chu Xiu had tossed out the notes left behind by several martial Dao grandmasters of the Guanzhong Disciplinary Hall right off the bat. This was indeed very attractive. Until this moment, they seemed to know the difference between the righteous and the demonic. Most of the so-called righteous martial arts world was all talk and no action. They always used some high-sounding reasons to fool you. Nie Renlong was good at this in the past. Before the demon-slaying alliance, Nie Renlong's words were high-sounding and righteous, but in reality, there were not many benefits. Since they were all righteous martial arts world, it was natural to put righteousness and morality first. What kind of words would it be to talk about benefits and benefits? On the other hand, the demonic path represented by Chu Xiu was much simpler. You do things for me, and I will give you benefits. It was that simple. This made them feel very good. However, at this moment, Chu Xiu said indifferently, "Gang leader Shen has helped me with my matters, so I naturally won't treat him unfairly. However, you guys won't have such treatment for the time being." A master of a small family could not help but say, "Dare I ask official Chu, what do we have to do to get this treatment?" Chu Xiu waved his hand and said, "It's very simple. Just help the Jianghu Hall. I have an agreement with the monks of the Great Light Temple. I will not make a move during this time, but you are different. You can do whatever you want. During this time, if anyone can make a forced surrender to the Jianghu Hall, no matter what means you use, you can come to me to receive a reward. Whether it is a secret book of martial arts, or the notes of condensing pills, or even if you want me to personally guide you in martial arts, it is all possible." Upon hearing this, everyone's breathing suddenly became rapid. What Chu Xiu said could be said to be exactly what they wanted. It was all what they needed. What these small forces and families lacked was heritage and heritage. Now that Chu Xiu could give them all of these, it seemed that joining the Suppression Martial Hall was not a difficult thing to do. Waving his hand, Chu Xiu dismissed them for the time being. Mei Qinglian walked in and said in surprise, "You're quite generous. The Guanzhong torture room has kept so many secret manuals for so many years, and you're giving them away just like that?" Chu Xiu said indifferently, "To them, these things are secret manuals, but to you and me, they're nothing more than ordinary things. There's no need to pay so much attention to them. I want to settle the matter with the Northern Yen as soon as possible so that I can give Xiang Long an explanation. I'm going to Wei County." Mei Qinglian was surprised. "Why are we going to Wei County? Wei Commandery used to be a small country. Even now, although it was bigger than some of the Northern Yen commanderies, it was not very strong. Especially after the death of Lu Gongyuan and Shenbai, the Azure Water Sword sect was removed from the martial world's song formula. Right now, there were plenty of sects that were thinking of replacing the Azure Water Sword sect, but Wind Sweeping Building had yet to make a decision. To become a sect listed in the martial world's song formula, it wasn't just about strength, but more importantly, the foundation. Therefore, Wind Sweeping Building had to be cautious. Otherwise, if they casually listed a sect in the martial world's song formula and ended up getting wiped out within a few years, it would be a slap to Wind Sweeping Building's face. Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "The martial world has a good understanding of the Azure Water Sword sect's strength, but have you seen the sword art that Shenbai used? Of course, you can interpret it as Shenbai's own opportunity and it has nothing to do with the Azure Water Sword sect. But from what I know, ever since I crippled Shenbai, he has been in seclusion in the Azure Water Sword sect and has never left. Therefore, I deduced that the Azure Water Sword sect must be hiding some secrets that outsiders don't know about. Furthermore, when the Heaven Gate's Divine Lord Luo asked me for Shenbai, he wasn't interested in Shenbai's strength and talent, but something on Shenbai. Apart from his amazing sword art, I really can't think of anything else on Shenbai that could attract the attention of Divine Lord Luo. Therefore, after the Northern Yen is stabilized, I am also going to Wei Prefecture to take a look. Anyway, Wei Prefecture is also a part of the Northern Yen. As the Martial Suppression Hall's governor, it is reasonable for me to bring people to Wei Prefecture, isn't it? Mei Qinglian looked at Chu Xiu in surprise. She didn't expect Chu Xiu to think so much. In fact, there were too many things that happened in that battle, causing most people to overlook many things. All the attention was placed on Chu Xiu, then on Divine Lord Luo. Later on, when the news of Shenbai's moon-worshipping cult spread out, it shook the entire martial world. Who would pay attention to a dead person like Shenbai? After assigning everyone's tasks, Chu Xiu immediately went into seclusion. After the forces that were forced to join by the martial suppression hall saw the benefits, they were more ruthless than anyone else. They began to attack some of their former opponents or clans that were not in harmony with each other. Anyway, they had conflicts with these clans before. It was just that they usually only had friction with each other, and the conflict was controlled within a certain range. But now, they had escalated the conflict, and the things that Chu Xiu took out just happened to give them a reason to start a war. In fact, Chu Xiu's method was very simple. It was nothing more than coercion and temptation. In the face of a force with backbone, they didn't care about your coercion, and they didn't care about your means of temptation. Naturally, it was useless. However, in this martial world, there were still many people who were greedy for life and were blinded by greed. Therefore, Chu Xiu's method became extremely useful. 1 month later, in the Shen family village. The new master of the Shen family village, Shen Changming, was proudly looking at some secret books of martial arts that he had exchanged from Chu Xiu. Although the previous master of the Shen family, Shen Changping, died in the hands of Chu Xiu, Shen Changming had no hatred for Chu Xiu. If the previous master did not die, how could he have the chance to become the master? Moreover, when Shen Changping was the master, he was always somewhat pedantic. Although the reputation of the Shen family village was good, in fact, the entire Shen family village did not get many benefits. Now that the Shenjia village had joined the suppression martial hall, they had no scruples in doing things. They directly made a move to forcefully subdue another small clan and force them to join the suppression martial hall. He also successfully obtained Chu Xiu's reward. Of course, this was not only due to his efforts, but also because he borrowed the reputation of the martial suppression hall. At this moment, a disciple ran in with a little panic. Shen Changming frowned and said, "What are you panicking about? Didn't I ask you to persuade the Li family to join the martial suppression hall? Why? The other party refused?" The Li family and the Shen family were in-laws. The distance between the two sides was a little far, so there was no conflict of interest. Their relationship had always been good. Shen Changming was calculating at this time. If he could persuade the Li family to join the martial suppression hall, wouldn't he be able to get a reward without shedding a drop of blood? So during this time, he sent several of his confidants to the Li family to lobby. The disciple said with an aggrieved expression, "Originally, we were about to succeed. With your personal letter, the Li family was about to agree. I didn't expect it to be disrupted in the end." Shen Changming frowned and said, "Who has eaten a bear's heart and leopard's gall to dare to disturb my Shen family's matters?" The disciple said, "The other party was wearing a Daoist robe and said that he was from the martial suppression hall." Shen Changming was stunned when he heard it. Someone from the martial suppression hall? What is going on? Could it be a misunderstanding? Put this matter aside for the time being and talk about it later. After giving the instructions, Shen Changming immediately went to Yanjing City and reported the matter to Chu Xiu. At this time, in the martial suppression hall headquarters in Yanjing City, Chu Xiu, Mei Qinglian, and Tang Ye were all there. After Shen Changming finished speaking, he looked at Chu Xiu with some apprehension. After a long while, Chu Xiu waved his hand and said faintly, "Okay, you don't have to worry about this matter for the time being. However, you did a good job. Go and find Zhao Qingping for another reward." After waiting for Shen Changming to leave ecstatically, Mei Qinglian snorted and said, "Wearing a Taoist robe? Then it should be the guys from the Shade Mountain sect." They crossed the line. Chu Xiu said faintly, it can't be considered as crossing the line. Daoist Wuyang is internal and I am external. If they want to completely absorb the Li family into the martial suppression hall and make them completely part of the martial suppression hall, then it can't be considered as breaking the rules. It would be unreasonable for us to forcefully make a move. Mei Qinglian looked at Chu Xiu in surprise. You mean, this matter is over? Mei Qinglian was very clear about Chu Xiu's character. He was not someone who would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. But now, Chu Xiu actually said that Daoist Wuyang and the others did not cross the line. This was very strange. Chu Xiu sneered, who said that I intend to let it go? Daoist Wuyang knows that his behavior is to test our bottom line. Regardless of whether this matter was done by him or his disciple, he can't escape responsibility. You do the first and I will do the second. It just so happens that I am still short of a stroke in my merit book. I will use the target that Daoist Wuyang has chosen to add to it. You know the movements of Daoist Wuyang and the others? Chu Xiu took out a letter and handed it to Mei Qinglian, saying, I don't know, but someone does. This is the information that Jianghu gave me. Daoist Wuyang really dared to make a move. He actually wants to pull the Divine Martial sect into the Martial Suppression Hall. More accurately, it should be on his side. I handed the trade route of the giant spirit gang to Jianghu. Jianghu is returning the favor. He is from the northern Yen. No matter how secretive Daoist Wuyang and the others are, they can't escape his eyes. Mei Qinglian glanced at the contents of the information and frowned, saying, Yan Huainan will join the Martial Suppression Hall? Unless you deal with Fang Datong and directly kill him and take control of the Divine Martial sect, Yan Huainan will never do such a thing. How can an expert who is rather famous in the martial world and is ranked on the Wind Cloud list be willing to lead the entire Divine Martial sect to become the Imperial Court's dog? Chu Xiu knocked on the table and said, everyone has something that they want but can't obtain. Perhaps Daoist Wuyang has found such a thing? The Divine Martial sect's 1,000-year celebration will be held in half a month. At that time, let's go and join in the fun. If you can't do things that harm others to benefit yourself, can't you do things that harm others without benefiting yourself? Chapter 687. The Southern Yan's Divine Martial School was considered a large sect in the Northern Yen land. However, if one looked closely at its history, it was actually not very powerful. The history of the Divine Martial sect was indeed not short, with a history of 1,000 years. However, in reality, the previous few sect masters were very mediocre. Even though the Divine Martial sect had such a domineering name, in reality, the Divine Martial sect was just a small sect that did not make the cut. After several generations of accumulation, the Divine Martial School had produced an extremely talented person like Yan Huainan. Only then could he lead the Divine Martial School to rise and become one of the top forces in the Jianghu. At the moment, Yan Huainan was smiling as he welcomed the guests who had come to participate in the Divine Martial School's celebration. The Divine Martial School's reputation in the northern Yen land was not good, and Yan Huainan was not as good at managing his reputation as Nie Renlong was, but the Divine Martial School had not done anything evil. Yan Huainan was also very disciplined and rarely offended people. Therefore, many forces had come to congratulate the Divine Martial School during its Millennium celebration. After standing in front of the door for a while, Yan Huainan handed the task of welcoming the guests to his eldest disciple and returned to the house. However, there was another person in the house at the moment. He was wearing an evil yin-yang impermanence Taoist robe and had a sinister appearance. It was Daoist Wuyang. Seeing Daoist Wuyang there, Yan Huainan could not help but frown. Why are you still here? Didn't I say that I need to think about it? Daoist Wuyang had an evil smile on his face as he said, what is there to think about, Sect Master Yan? This is the only chance for you, or your Divine Martial School, to rise. I'm afraid that even you did not expect that your Divine Martial School would have a true fire spiritual refinement realm expert. Sect Master Yen, you've been a martial arts master for a long time, so you should have noticed that your divine martial school's cultivation method has flaws, causing your bottleneck to be greater than others. You must fix the cultivation method before you can take another step forward. In fact, this is the reason. In the past, your ancestral master took away a portion of the divine martial gate's cultivation method. To be able to cultivate to the martial Dao Grandmaster realm with an incomplete cultivation method and have such strength, to be honest, I quite admire you, Gate Master Yen. Yen Huainan frowned and said, "Are you sure you didn't lie to me about this? That's an expert in the true fire spirit refinement realm. It's impossible that our divine martial sect doesn't have any records of it." Daoist Wuyang chuckled and said, "How could I possibly deceive Sect Master Yen on such a matter? When the ancestor of your divine martial sect stepped into the true fire spirit refinement realm, he was outside, so the disciples of your sect did not know about it. Furthermore, your ancestor died accidentally in the southern barbarians. According to the investigation of the Een Mountain sect, your ancestor might have died in the hands of the Sabodhi monastery. That is the Sabodhi monastery, one of the two Buddhist sects in the north and the south. Sect Master Yen, you don't have to think about revenge. However, I will hand over the inheritance of my ancestor to you, Sect Master Yen. In the future, the divine martial sect will become the vassal of the Jianghu Hall, and at the same time, it will naturally become a part of the imperial court." Yen Huainan snorted coldly and said, "Being a dog of the imperial court can be considered as glorious?" Daoist Wuyang said in a low voice, "Sect Master Yen, this is the general trend. Regardless of whether you are a dog of the imperial court or not, I believe you should have sensed that the martial world has not been peaceful recently. Yi Shaonan defeated the old heavenly master and divine monk Rama in a row, and the moon-worshipping cult already has the atmosphere and power of the number one sect of the evil path. The hidden devil lineage has also begun to reappear in the martial world. The righteous martial world is in chaos, and everyone is scheming. At this time, no one can remain absolutely neutral, and no one can guarantee absolute safety. Sect Master Yen, which side is your divine martial sect going to stand on in this storm? The righteous path or the evil path? If you don't want to stand on either side, then your only choice is the imperial court. Although the imperial court cannot suppress the war between the righteous path and the demonic path, it can at least protect your divine martial sect." Yen Huainan's expression was somewhat uncertain. In fact, Yen Huainan would definitely refuse to join the so-called Jianghu Hall. As the sect master of the divine martial sect, he did not want to have anything to do with the imperial court. However, when Daoist Wuyang took out the relic of their divine martial sect's ancestor, he wavered. Even he did not know that his divine martial sect, which did not seem to have produced any powerhouses, actually had an ancestor in the true fire spirit refinement realm. Furthermore, just as Daoist Wuyang said, a storm was brewing in the martial world, and the divine martial sect had to think of a way to protect itself. Yen Huainan was silent for a while, then said, "I still want to ask one more thing. Who is in charge of your Jianghu Hall?" During this time, Chu Xiu's reputation in the northern Yen martial world was not weak. He controlled the giant spirit gang, severely injured Daoist Floating Cloud, and even made the Great Light Temple return empty-handed. He subdued countless northern Yen martial world forces, and his limelight was unparalleled. You should know about the grudge between me and Chu Xiu. If I become Chu Xiu's subordinate after joining the Jianghu Hall, wouldn't I become a joke? Daoist Wuyang said indifferently, His Majesty personally said that in the Jianghu Hall, Chu Xiu is the governor to the outside world, and I am the chief manager to the inside world. There is no difference in seniority. Right now, Chu Xiu is famous in the martial world, but after Sect Master Yen joins the Jianghu Hall, it will be my turn to be more famous than Chu Xiu. You are on my side, and you have no direct relationship with Chu Xiu. He cannot control you. The martial artists in West Yen basically knew about the grudge between Yen Huainan and Chu Xiu, and the reason was because of his precious daughter. To be honest, regarding this matter, not only did the martial artists in West Yen not hate Chu Xiu, but they were also grateful to Chu Xiu. Yan Tingting used to be a tyrant in West Yen. She was simply unreasonable, but no one could do anything to her. After all, she was Yan Huainan's most beloved daughter. In the end, Yan Tingting was completely scared out of her wits by Chu Xiu. She stayed in the Divine Martial Gate all day long, which saved West Yen from harm. Daoist Wuyang also knew about Yan Tingting, and he also looked down on Yan Huainan. It was not shameful for a man to pursue fame, wealth, and power. However, Yan Huainan was the sect master of a sect, yet he spoiled his daughter unreasonably. This was not a good thing, as he was too sentimental about his daughter. Meanwhile, on the mountain road in the outside world, Chu Xiu was leading Mei Qinglian and the others. They were slowly ascending the mountain road to the Divine Martial Gate. When the martial artists saw Chu Xiu, they were all surprised. Why was Chu Xiu here? Had the Divine Martial Gate surrendered to the Jianghu Hall, or was he looking for trouble? The senior disciple of the Divine Martial Gate, who was in charge of welcoming the guests, braced himself and walked up. Chu Xiu. What do you want to do in my Divine Martial Gate? Chu Xiu laughed and said, of course, I am here to celebrate the Millennium Celebration of your Divine Martial Gate. Although you did not invite me, as the governor of the Jianghu Hall, I have to come on behalf of the Imperial Court to congratulate you. By the way, I have also brought a gift to congratulate the prosperity of the Divine Martial Gate, which has lasted for thousands of years. Everyone present was stunned, but then they felt that there was something wrong with Chu Xiu's words. What did he mean by lasting for thousands of years? Now that the history of the Divine Martial Gate had reached 1,000 years, Chu Xiu's words were like wishing a centenarian a long life. It was very awkward. However, everyone present, including the senior disciple of the Divine Martial Gate, did not dare to pick on Chu Xiu. However, when Chu Xiu asked someone to carry the gift up, everyone's complexion changed. They were sure that Chu Xiu was definitely looking for trouble. The gift that Chu Xiu asked someone to carry up was actually a huge mechanical pendulum. The appearance was very gorgeous, but the problem was, would anyone give a clock as a gift? Sending a clock to the end of its life was simply deliberately humiliating the Divine Martial Gate. Patting the big clock, Chu Xiu laughed and said, "This is a treasure produced in the western region. It is rare in the Central Plains. I spent a lot of effort to get it. How about it? Are you touched?" At this moment, an angry shout came, "Chu Xiu! What do you mean by this?" Yan Huainan strode over with a hint of anger on his face. The Divine Martial Gate's Millennium Celebration was supposed to be a joyous occasion, but now it had been disrupted by Chu Xiu. Just now, he had been talking about Chu Xiu with Taoist Wu Wang. He did not expect that Chu Xiu would appear in front of him now. Chu Xiu said indifferently, "I said it was a congratulatory gift. Even if Sect Master Yan does not like my gift, at least I showed my sincerity, right?" Yan Huainan took a deep breath and said, "Okay, now that the gift is here, you can leave." Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "This is your fault, Sect Master Yan. How can you do things like this? You want me to leave after giving me the gift? You won't even let me eat?" Yan Huainan suppressed his anger and said, "Okay. Prepare for the banquet." Today was the Divine Martial Gate's Millennium Celebration. Although Chu Xiu looked like he was looking for trouble, he had not done anything against the rules. Yan Huainan could not turn against him directly. As a result, Yan Huainan had to suppress his anger and put up with it for a while. A group of disciples of the Divine Martial Gate began to set up a banquet in the square in the center of the Divine Martial Gate, inviting the people from the martial arts world to sit down. To prevent Chu Xiu from deliberately making trouble, Yan Huainan had placed him at the top of the table, close to Yan Huainan. After the banquet was set up, Chu Xiu had begun to eat before Yan Huainan could say anything. While eating, Chu Xiu nodded. Where had the Divine Martial Gate found this chef? His cooking skills were not bad. Suppressing his anger, Yan Huainan cleared his throat, raised his cup, and said, "Thank you, everyone, for coming to the Millennium celebration of my Divine Force sect. I'm very grateful. This cup is for all of you." After exchanging some pleasantries and drinking a few glasses of wine, some of the small forces present came forward one by one, presenting their gifts and complimenting them. At this moment, Chu Xiu winked at Tangya. Tangya immediately took out a small notebook and took notes as he muttered, "The Zhang family of Linzhou sent a pair of 1,000-year-old water jades. TSK, not bad. They are quite rich and fat. And the Divine Wind sect of Changlin County sent a fire-repelling pearl. TSK, this sect is a bit stingy. Their name sounds like the Divine Martial Gate, but they are so stingy. Are you jealous?" When the people present saw what Chu Xiu had done, their expressions changed suddenly. Chapter 688. The atmosphere in the Divine Force sect was very strange. On one side, people were happily presenting their gifts, while on the other side, Tangya was holding a pen and recording. Gradually, everyone present felt that something was wrong. What did Chu Xiu mean by this? Was he going to settle the score later? Therefore, the sects who had originally planned to present their gifts to leave a good impression in front of Yan Huainan all stopped in their tracks. The scene suddenly became very strange. The people who were about to congratulate Yan Huainan were all stunned. There was silence, and the scene was very awkward. Yan Huainan looked at Chu Xiu and shouted angrily, "Chu Xiu! What do you mean?" Chu Xiu was surprised. "What did I do?" "Sect Master Yan, please continue. Don't worry about me. I'm just learning from you. The extravagance of the Divine Martial sect is not bad. One day, my Jianghu Hall will also hold a celebration of 100 days or 1,000 days. Then, I will ask everyone to come and see if my Jianghu Hall's reputation is big enough for so many people to come and give gifts." Looking at the people present, Chu Xiu smiled coldly and said, "Everyone, I remember all the gifts you have given me. You have given the Divine Force sect such a big gift. If I receive less than the Divine Force sect's gift, it means that you look down on me, Chu Xiu." As soon as he said this, the expressions of everyone present changed. Some of the people who had not had time to present their gifts were relieved. However, as soon as he said this, they were even more afraid to step forward. Yan Huainan gripped the armrest of his chair tightly. The dragon chair, which was made of fine steel, had deep marks on it. It was obvious that he was suppressing his anger. He did not want to fight with Chu Xiu. One of the reasons was that he did not have the confidence to defeat Chu Xiu. After stepping into the martial arts master realm, Chu Xiu had killed Fang Datong, defeated Daoist Fuyun, and defeated Su Xing, the first seat of the Dharma Hall of the Great Light Temple. His power was unparalleled. Although Yan Huainan was also ranked on the Fengyun list, he was not confident that he could face Su Xing. It was the same for him to face Chu Xiu, who had defeated Su Xing. Of course, this was only part of the reason. All martial artists had their own pride. Before they really fought, Yan Huainan only felt that he was not confident that he could defeat Chu Xiu. However, he did not think that he was inferior to Chu Xiu. The real reason was that he was hesitating whether he should agree to Taoist Wuyang's request to join the subduing martial hall. If he joined, then the conflict between him and Chu Xiu would become an internal conflict, and everything would be fine. If he were to shed all pretenses of cordiality with Chu Xiu and attack him now, then there would be no room for reconciliation. Yan Huainan was quite patient. Faced with Chu Xiu's attitude of deliberately stirring up trouble, he actually put up with it. In the end, he said coldly, "Serve the dishes." When Yan Huainan said that the dishes would be served, he meant it. It was a big dish that the Divine Force School had prepared for this celebration. The people from other forces had generously sent their congratulatory gifts, so the Divine Force School could not be too stingy. Therefore, Yan Huainan deliberately spent a lot of money to buy a fierce beast, red eagle, that had been killed by someone from the southern barbarian land, as the main dish. It was said that fierce beasts were quite common in ancient times. However, after the great calamity of ancient times, the fierce beasts left in Jianghu were very rare. Only in places like the 100,000 mountains of West Chu or the southern barbarian land, which were rarely visited by people, would there be some. Most of them were alone. When they were discovered, they would immediately be attacked by groups of people, treating them as a moving treasure house. However, that was indeed the case. Almost every part of these vicious beasts was a treasure. Even their flesh contained extremely strong yuan qi. Eating them would be of some help to one's cultivation. Although it was not too much, it was at least better than some low-level spirit herbs. This kind of thing was very expensive, and ordinary small forces could not buy it even if they wanted to. This time, it was the Divine Force School's Millennium celebration that they had prepared such a thing to keep up appearances. Yan Huainan already hated Chu Xiu to the extreme. The sooner he finished the meal, the sooner he could get out of here. He did not want to see Chu Xiu again. One after another, the maids walked to the crowd with exquisite dishes. After they put down the dishes and opened the lids, a strong fragrance instantly wafted over, which was very tempting. The hands of the maid in front of Chu Xiu were trembling slightly. Yan Huainan looked at the maid with dissatisfaction, but he did not say anything. These maids were just ordinary people. It would be fine if they were facing other people, but it was understandable that they were a little scared when facing a great devil like Chu Xiu, who had killed people like flies and was famous in Jianghu. Chu Xiu looked at the red eagle's meat in front of him. It was as red as fire. He did not know whether it was because it was originally red or because it was cooked, but the fragrance was very tempting. The others could not bear it any longer, and they started to eat. When Chu Xiu picked up a piece of meat with his chopsticks and was about to eat it, a strange look flashed in his eyes. However, he acted as if he did not notice it, and he directly threw the meat into his mouth. Mei Qinglian, who was at the side, also wanted to pick up the meat, but Chu Xiu blocked her with his chopsticks. Mei Qinglian raised her brows and said, "It's not a good habit to eat alone." Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "This meat is not delicious." Mei Qinglian looked at the fragrant red eagle's meat in front of her, and she wore a look that said, "Do you think I'm an idiot? If it's not delicious, why are you enjoying it so much?" However, Mei Qinglian reacted soon after. She frowned and put down her chopsticks. When Chu Xiu had finished the red eagle's meat, a woman's voice suddenly rang out, filled with deep hatred. "Chu Xiu! You finally have this day. You killed my lover, and I've waited for many years for this opportunity. Brother, can you see that I've finally avenged you today?" Everyone present was stunned, and they looked outside. They did not know when a skinny woman with a twisted and hateful face was standing there, looking at Chu Xiu with a pleased expression. Yan Huainan's expression suddenly changed, and he shouted angrily, "Nonsense! Go back! And what are you doing? Didn't I ask you to watch the young mistress? Who let her out?" Hearing Yan Huainan's words, everyone present suddenly realized that this woman was Yan Tingting. In the past, Yan Tingting would always appear in the northern Yan martial arts world. However, ever since she brought people to kill Chu Xiu in Eastern Qi, she had been killed by Chu Xiu, and she had almost died at Chu Xiu's hands. Since then, she had never appeared in the Jianghu, so the warriors present did not recognize her. Of course, the most important thing was that the current Yan Tingting was very different from the Yan Tingting of the past. In the past, Yan Tingting had been a beauty, but now she was thin, and her cheekbones were protruding. Coupled with her hateful expression, she looked somewhat terrifying and twisted. Yan Tingting said coldly, "Father, you don't have to worry about Chu Xiu's revenge. I've already put the moon-worshipping cult's broken intestines goo in the red eagle's meat he ate. The broken intestines goo will devour all of Chu Xiu's qi and blood within 2 hours, and his intestines will rot and he will die. Hearing this, everyone's expression changed abruptly. With the rise of the moon-worshipping cult, all kinds of news about the moon-worshipping cult had spread to the Jianghu, especially the wind-sweeping tower, where all the information about the moon-worshipping cult had been snatched up. The moon-worshipping cult was good at many things. Not only were they good at demonic arts and secret techniques, but they were also famous for their poisonous insects. The broken intestines goo was one of the most famous poisonous insects in the moon-worshipping cult. Even a martial Dao grandmaster could not resist it, and they would be poisoned to death within 2 hours. Of course, the broken intestines goo also had a fatal weakness, and that was that it was extremely fragile. In the outside world, it was as fragile as an ordinary insect, and it had to enter the human body to take effect. During this period of time, Chu Xiu had killed many people in the northern Yen martial arts world. It could be said that he was extremely awe-inspiring, but in the end, he died in the hands of a woman. Everyone looked at Chu Xiu with a hint of schadenfreude, and the way they looked at Yan Tingting was even more strange. When this woman went crazy, she did not care about anything. She had poisoned Chu Xiu to kill him, but in reality, she had also destroyed the divine force gate. Yan Huainan pointed at Yan Tingting, and he was so angry that his hand was trembling. Was Chu Xiu that easy to kill? Was he someone who could be killed so easily? It was possible to kill Chu Xiu. If Yan Huainan had the ability, he could have killed Chu Xiu in the name of the righteous path in public, and then asked for help from the righteous path sects like the Great Light Temple. Yan Huainan would have immediately become the hero of the northern Yen martial arts world, and he would have been protected by the righteous path. But now? Chu Xiu had been killed by such a despicable method as poison. Usually, it was those shameless people of the demonic path who would do such a thing. Why would the people of the righteous path do such a thing? Although the person who had poisoned Chu Xiu was not Yan Huainan, what was the difference between Yan Tingting and Yan Huainan? Once such a thing happened, although there would definitely be people who would applaud the death of Chu Xiu, there would definitely be people who would despise Yan Huainan for his despicable methods. Moreover, with Chu Xiu dead, the Immortal clan would definitely be enraged. Chu Xiu was the most outstanding martial art practitioner of the younger generation of the Immortal clan, and he was even considered the successor of the Immortal clan. However, he had died in such a despicable method. If the Immortal clan did not avenge Chu Xiu, how could they show their face? Moreover, Chu Xiu was now the governor of the Jianghu clan, and he represented the imperial court. In the end, he was killed by poison in public after coming to the Divine Force Gate. Did the Divine Force Gate still have any respect for the imperial court? Yan Huainan was not the only one who could think of these consequences, everyone present could think of them as well. Everyone could not help but look at Yan Huainan and Chu Xiu with a hint of sympathy. Madmen were scary, but a madwoman was even scarier than a madman. One should never underestimate a woman's hatred. When Yan Tingting went crazy, not only would she want Chu Xiu's life, but she would also want Yan Huainan's life. However, at this moment, no one realized that Chu Xiu's expression was very calm. The same was true for Mei Qinglian, who was beside him. It was as if they did not know that he had been poisoned by the intestine-severing goo. Looking at Yan Tingting, Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "What is love in the world? It makes people promise to live and die for it. I did not expect that your love for that good-for-nothing of the Yu clan would be so deep. It was my fault that you were separated by life and death. I do not kill women easily. Fine, I will make an exception today and send you to see him." Chapter 689. What is love in the world? It makes people promise to live and die for it. Everyone present looked at Chu Xiu with a strange look in their eyes, especially a few women. They looked at Chu Xiu with a hazy look in their eyes. Chu Xiu, a murderous devil, could actually write such a poignant poem? However, the majority of the women present were maids of the divine martial sect. Although they had heard of Chu Xiu's various legends, how could a handsome young master who was able to compose such a poem be the sinister demon they had imagined? There must be some misunderstanding, it must be. However, after that, everyone present suddenly felt that something was amiss. Looking at Chu Xiu's appearance, why did he seem to be fearless? Yan Tingting looked at Chu Xiu in disbelief. Why haven't you acted up yet? Could it be that the intestine-severing goo is fake? The moon-worshipping cult's goo were so powerful, but they were also extremely expensive. Moreover, some goo were hard to buy even with money. All these years, Yan Tingting had spent a lot of effort to get some intestine-severing goo. Could it be fake? Chu Xiu's hand moved. His arm instantly bulged. It was densely packed, as if something was twisting inside. It was extremely horrifying and disgusting. Using the tip of his finger, he sliced open his arm. In an instant, over 10 white and plump bugs, each as thick as a pinky finger, were squeezed out from Chu Xiu's arm. Only the heavens knew how Yan Tingting had hidden these goo bugs in the scarlet eagle's meat. Casually touching his arm, a faint demonic aura instantly healed the wounds on Chu Xiu's arm. This was the effect of the eternal demon pill. Its recovery ability was simply abnormal. Taking a step forward, Chu Xiu casually stomped the intestine-severing goo into meat paste. He said indifferently, "The goo worms are real. However, the moon-worshipping cult and my Inma clan are both demonic sections." Yan Tingting, are you still so naive, or should I say, foolish? Using moon-worshipping cult's goo worms to deal with Chu Xiu was indeed a very stupid thing to do. The glazed golden silk goo in Chu Xiu's body was originally a masterpiece of moon-worshipping cult's goo refinement technique. It could be said to be one of the strongest goo worms refined by moon-worshipping cult in history. It was simply an existence that could not be replicated. Any moon-worshipping cult's goo worms or poisonous creatures would be restrained by the glazed golden silk goo. At this time, it was possible to say that Chu Xiu was immune to all poisons. Seeing the broken intestine goo, which she had worked so hard to get, being easily trampled to death by Chu Xiu, Yan Tingting broke down. She murmured, "Impossible. Impossible. Nothing is impossible in this world. Since you are so sad, I will send you to find your brother Yu and help you reunite." Taking a step forward, Chu Xiu's body was surrounded by a monstrous demonic flame. A cold aura instantly enveloped the whole divine force gate. Even the sunny sky became gloomy, as if it was covered by dark clouds. Chu Xiu said that he did not kill women. In fact, he rarely killed women. Chu Xiu was not talking nonsense about this. Of course, the premise was that the woman did not cross his bottom line. Otherwise, there would be no distinction between men and women in Chu Xiu's place. There would only be a quick death or a slow death. At this time, the women who were still obsessed with Chu Xiu's poem truly believed that the man in front of them was not a worldly gentleman in their imagination, but a real devil. Yan Huainan stood in front of Chu Xiu and shouted in a low voice, "Chu Xiu, I will give you an explanation for this. Tingting is still young and ignorant. Please let her go this time." Even if Yan Tingting had gone overboard and almost harmed the whole divine force gate, she was still his daughter, the daughter he loved the most. He could not let his daughter be killed by Chu Xiu in front of him. Would he still be a man if he did that? Chu Xiu squinted at Yan Huainan and said in a serious tone, "Do you know what it means to cheat your father, Sect Master Yan?" Yan Huainan frowned. He had never heard of this word, but his intuition told him that it was not a good word. Chu Xiu said indifferently, "Actually, I came to the divine force gate to cause trouble. But Sect Master Yan, you are really good at enduring until now. I, Chu Xiu, am not an unreasonable person. Since I couldn't find any evidence to blackmail you, I was going to leave after eating. But your precious daughter gave me a good reason to attack. If someone wants to kill me, I will kill him. As for an explanation, I am afraid you can't afford it, Sect Master Yan." As soon as he finished speaking, Chu Xiu took a step forward. The demon energy around him soared into the sky and suddenly gathered in the heavenly demon dance in his hand. The pitch-black demon energy seemed to have condensed into a solid form. When the saber slashed down, the demon energy covered the sky and the sun, and its power was extremely powerful. He had made an agreement with Su Du that he would not attack the Northern Yen forces for the time being. But he had also said that if someone wanted to court death, then they should not blame him for being cruel and merciless. Yan Huainan did not want to court death, but it was a pity that he had a daughter who wanted to court death. Also, he was not cruel enough, so he did not dare and would not kill his family in the name of justice. Facing Chu Xiu's extremely powerful demon saber, Yan Huainan shouted. He also straightened his palm as a saber, and the upstanding energy circulated in his hands. Two saber lights slashed down, but they were not able to offset the power of Chu Xiu's saber and were directly shattered. However, at this moment, Yan Huainan used his fingers as a sword, and whistling sword energy kept shooting out, bombarding on Chu Xiu's saber and weakening its power. In the end, Yan Huainan punched down. The upstanding energy condensed in one point and exploded with a loud bang, shattering Chu Xiu's saber. However, Yan Huainan himself also retreated several steps, and a hint of astonishment appeared in his eyes. This Chu Xiu is so powerful. Yan Huainan's nickname was Magical Transformation, which came from his martial arts. It could be said that his martial arts were ever-changing and all-encompassing. Unlike Chu Xiu, who was proficient in all kinds of cultivation methods, Yan Huainan was not proficient in them. However, his martial arts imitated all kinds of martial arts, and the number of imitations was more than Chu Xiu's. It would not be an exaggeration to say that his martial arts were ever-changing. However, this kind of martial arts had a fatal flaw, which was that they had more than enough variations, but they were not strong enough. Although Yan Huainan had entered the martial arts master realm more than 10 years earlier than Chu Xiu, he was still not as strong as Chu Xiu in terms of strength. His upstanding energy condensed into an arrow, and the upstanding energy shot out like a flowing light, whistling toward Chu Xiu. Seeing this arrow, a mocking smile appeared on Chu Xiu's face. He also condensed his bow into an arrow, but it was not the essential qi that had condensed into an arrow, but the vital spirit. An arrow shot out toward Yan Huainan. Both sides shot arrows at each other, and neither of them chose to block. Instead, they went straight for each other. Yan Huainan's arrow arrived first. Almost when the arrow was about to reach him and the upstanding energy was about to explode, Chu Xiu moved several feet to the other side gently. It was this distance of several feet that caused Yan Huainan's arrow to miss its target, and a huge pit was blasted in the ground. On the other side, Yan Huainan was also trying to dodge Chu Xiu's soul-extinguishing arrow. However, he was horrified to find that no matter where he tried to dodge to, he could not escape from the soul-extinguishing arrow. In the end, he could only perform a seal with both hands, and a golden radiance bloomed behind his head. It seemed to have formed a barrier that blocked the power of the soul-extinguishing arrow. However, a bit of the remaining power still blasted into Yan Huainan's body, causing him to groan and retreat quickly. Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows. At the moment, he was a little surprised. Yan Huainan even knew a primordial spirit secret technique? More accurately speaking, what Yan Huainan knew was not a primordial spirit secret technique, but a defensive technique of the primordial spirit secret technique. Even so, this was still very rare. In the past, when Chu Xiu's opponents faced a primordial spirit secret technique like the soul-extinguishing arrow, most of them could only use the power of their vital energy and blood to resist it. There were very few warriors like Yan Huainan who practiced a defensive technique of the primordial spirit. After all, only a small portion of the people in the Jianghu were good at primordial spirit secret techniques like the soul-extinguishing arrow. Unless one had an enemy who was an expert who was good at primordial spirit secret techniques, most people would not practice such useless martial arts, as they might not be able to use it for the rest of their lives. Sect Master Yen, you know quite a lot. I wonder if you can withstand this move of mine." A dense killing intent bloomed in Chu Xiu's eyes. This time, he really wanted to kill Yan Huainan. In the beginning, Chu Xiu did not want to kill Yan Huainan. After all, the divine martial sect's foundation was much stronger than the giant spirit gangs. Yan Huainan was an expert on the wind cloud list, and his strength was not something that Fang Datong could compare to. In fact, Yan Huainan's ranking on the wind cloud list was just one rank behind Chu Xiu. This time, he had come purely to find trouble with Daoist Wuwang and ruin the divine martial sect's plan to join his faction. However, who would have thought that something like this would happen? This gave Chu Xiu a very good reason, a reason to destroy the divine martial sect. Amidst the boundless demonic aura, a murderous aura soared into the sky. As Chu Xiu slashed down with his saber, the demonic aura and murderous aura around him merged into one, forming an evil, blackish-red color. Yan Huainan knew that he was no match for Chu Xiu in terms of strength and foundation. Therefore, his figure changed unpredictably. He used fists, palms, sabers, swords, finger techniques, body techniques, and all kinds of martial arts techniques with ease. It could be said that he was ever-changing, and he managed to completely block Chu Xiu's attacks. However, little did he know that the more Yan Huainan fought, the more tired he felt. When Chu Xiu's simple saber slashed down, Yan Huainan had to use several moves to block and neutralize it. He could not even make a mistake with a single move. Otherwise, even if he did not die, he would be severely injured. Looking at Yan Huainan, who was jumping up and down in front of him, Chu Xiu withdrew his saber and retreated. Everyone present was taken aback, wondering if Yan Huainan was going to stop fighting. However, Chu Xiu merely weaved seals with both hands. In an instant, a powerful Buddhist light burst forth, enveloping the entire sky above the divine martial sect. The Vairocana Buddha's shadow condensed behind Chu Xiu. However, at the moment, he was covered in demonic flames, which combined with the Buddhist light, giving off an evil sense of beauty. However, Chu Xiu did not make a move right away. Chapter 690. With Chu Xiu's power, it was only a matter of time before he defeated Yan Huainan. If nothing unexpected happened in this battle, Chu Xiu had a 90% chance of winning. However, defeating a person and killing a person were two different situations. Now, Chu Xiu had asked Mei Qinglian to attack together with him. Even though they had the upper hand, they still had to fight 2 against 1. It was obvious that they were prepared to kill Yan Huainan. Anyway, Chu Xiu's reputation in the underworld was extremely bad, so he was not afraid of people saying that he was immoral and ganging up on him. Fighting side by side was not something that only the righteous sects would do. Yan Huainan did not know Mei Qinglian. In fact, there were not many people in the underworld who knew Mei Qinglian. However, the power that Mei Qinglian had displayed was that of a genuine martial Dao master. Yan Huainan seemed to vaguely remember that when Chu Xiu had fought against the demon-killing alliance, this woman had made a move. She had even been able to hold back the Vajrayard's first seed of the Great Light Temple, Su Yan. Her power was extraordinary. In the current situation, if he were to be held back by Mei Qinglian, there would only be one ending waiting for him, death. At the thought of this, Yan Huainan immediately shouted angrily, "Daoist Wuyang! How long are you going to watch the show? I'm willing to join the suppressing martial hall. I'll bring the divine martial sect to the suppressing martial hall and help me stop Chu Xiu." Everyone present was stunned when they heard Yan Huainan's words. Join the suppressing martial hall? Was Yan Huainan going to admit defeat? At that moment, a flash of sword light suddenly descended. An old man wearing a yin-yang impermanence Taoist robe descended from mid-air. The hilt of the long sword in his hand was pitch black, but the blade was scarlet. The long sword swept out, and the sword light was like a long tongue that swept away a large amount of Buddhist light. As the sword light swallowed and spat, the power of Chu Xiu's great sun-changing technique was constantly being weakened. Even if the power of Vairocana descended, its power would be greatly reduced. Therefore, Chu Xiu took the initiative to disperse the seal. He narrowed his eyes at the person before him and said coldly, "Daoist Wuyang, you have crossed the line." Daoist Wuyang looked leisurely at Chu Xiu and said, "Who said that?" "I have been acting in accordance with His Majesty's instructions and secretly instigated some Jianghu martial artists to be used by our martial suppression hall. Now, the divine martial sect's sect master Yen is willing to join my subduing martial hall. What's wrong with this?" Actually, Daoist Wuyang's words were a little sophistry. Xiang Long's original intention was to let Chu Xiu deal with the Northern Yen martial arts forces. After all, this was what Chu Xiu had done in the Guanzhong torture room. He should be very familiar with it. Daoist Wuyang's goal was to secretly develop some loose cultivator martial artists who were not weak and make them a member of the subduing martial hall. But in fact, Xiang Long did not say that he could only make a move against some loose cultivator martial artists. Now that Daoist Wuyang wanted to bring the divine martial sect into the subduing martial hall, there was nothing wrong with that, provided that he could succeed. It should be said that the root of this matter was Xiang Long. He did not trust Daoist Wuyang and similarly did not trust Chu Xiu. Otherwise, he should have known that the subduing martial hall only had one steward, which was definitely more efficient than having two. Not to mention that he should have known about the grudges between the Shadow Mountain sect and the Hidden Devil clan. In the end, he still brought Daoist Wuyang and Chu Xiu together. Chu Xiu stared at Daoist Wuyang and said coldly, "Let's not talk about these messy matters for now. The divine martial sect wanted to poison me. I want an explanation for this matter. Is that wrong? Daoist Wuyang, don't forget which side you belong to now. Get out of the way. Otherwise, I will report you to His Majesty." Daoist Wuyang frowned. In fact, he was also cursing Yan Huainan in his heart. What the hell was wrong with this guy? He couldn't even control his own daughter. Originally, Daoist Wuyang did not want to appear in this matter. After all, Chu Xiu was also a member of the subduing martial hall. Killing each other from the subduing martial hall in front of outsiders would be a slap to Chu Xiu's face, as well as his own. If His Majesty found out, it would have an even worse impact. But now that Yan Huainan had already called out his name, he had no choice but to appear. Daoist Wuyang could only cough and say, "Chu Xiu, it is true that the divine martial sect is in the wrong in this matter, but don't be so unforgiving. This matter has nothing to do with Sect Master Yen. It was all his daughter's doing. Don't worry about this. Even if the divine martial sect does not want to give you an explanation, I will give you one." A cold smile appeared on Chu Xiu's face. "Daoist Wuyang, it seems that you still don't understand me. If I, Chu Xiu, want to kill someone, no one can stop me. If I can't kill him today, then I'll do it another day. If I can't kill him another day, then I'll look for an opportunity day and night. You can protect the divine martial sect for a while, but can you protect the divine martial sect forever? Besides, you don't know what you're talking about. What did you say just now? Give me an explanation." What a joke. What explanation do I, Chu Xiu, need from you? You're not fit to give me an explanation. Get lost. Otherwise, I'll kill you as well. If Daoist Wuyang was still concerned about the subduing martial hall's reputation and the imperial court, then Chu Xiu really had no scruples. Without the subduing martial hall, Daoist Wuyang would have no place to stay. As for him, Chu Xiu, without the subduing martial hall, he could just continue to hang around in the Guanzhong torture room. Therefore, he dared to turn against Daoist Wuyang without any scruples, but Daoist Wuyang didn't. However, under Chu Xiu's provocation, Daoist Wuyang was also enraged. He snorted coldly and said in a hoarse and gloomy tone, "When it's possible to let someone off, one should spare them. Chu Xiu, do you really not care about the subduing martial hall's reputation? With a cold laugh, Chu Xiu took a step forward. The demonic aura on the heavenly demon dance in his hand surged, and it slashed down with a violent, ferocious aura. He had already turned against Daoist Wuyang long ago, so was there still a need to talk nonsense now? Daoist Wuyang frowned. He held the sword in his right hand, and the sinister long sword in his hand was filled with an eerie ghostly aura. When the sword was drawn, there was actually a faint wailing sound of ghosts. It was extremely sinister. Since Daoist Wuyang had made a move, Yan Huainan naturally couldn't just sit back and watch. He also rushed toward Chu Xiu, but he was stopped by Mei Qinglian. However, Yan Huainan didn't panic. With a wave of his hand, he ordered the disciples of the Divine Force sect to immediately attack Tangya and the others. This time, Chu Xiu was here to look for trouble, not to exterminate the sect. Therefore, he only brought Tangya and a dozen or so elites. Although each of them was an expert, and the weakest had the cultivation of 5 qis collecting in origin, this was the Divine Martial Sect, which was the opponent's home ground. In terms of numbers, they would definitely not be able to compete with the opponent. Therefore, they were at a disadvantage right from the start. At this moment, Yan Huainan also had a murderous intent. If he didn't kill Chu Xiu this time, Chu Xiu would probably kill him as well. Now that Chu Xiu's trusted subordinates were in danger, Yan Huainan didn't believe that Chu Xiu could still stay focused and maintain this combat strength. Moreover, Yan Huainan also believed in Daoist Wuyang's strength. Although Taoist Wuyang and Yan Huainan had not fought directly before, Taoist Wuyang was appointed by Xiang Long to be the general director of the subduing martial hall on equal footing with Chu Xiu. This meant that Taoist Wuyang definitely had the qualifications to challenge Chu Xiu in terms of strength. Otherwise, the checks and balances would become a joke. In fact, this was indeed the case. Daoist Wuyang's cultivation method was indeed very evil. Even Chu Xiu was a little surprised by it. The sword light, which carried an eerie ghostly aura, was like a long tongue. It suddenly curled up and swallowed a portion of Chu Xiu's saber energy. In the end, the long sword actually left his hand and was controlled by a grayish-white ghostly shadow to dance in mid-air. The sword light was eerie and eerie. Upon closer inspection, the ghostly shadow that was dancing the long sword actually looked like the legendary White Impermanence. Sword Dance of Impermanence, Yellow Springs of Misfortune. The techniques of the Shadow Mountain sect didn't lie between righteous and demonic, but between life and death. Chu Xiu frowned. He withdrew his saber and retreated, forming a Buddhist seal with his hands. He rapidly executed the 9 words formula of fast and slow. Blinding Buddhist light turned into 9 words wheels that smashed downwards. The powerful force shook the void, causing loud booms. The sword dance of impermanence was completely shattered by the 9 seals. However, the long sword in Daoist Wuyang's hand twisted, and the grayish-white Gang Qi instantly turned into a shadow that swallowed Chu Xiu. Upon closer inspection, it was actually the head of the Black Impermanence. It opened its mouth ferociously, wanting to swallow Chu Xiu whole. Moreover, the suction force was extremely strong. Everywhere it passed, even the spiritual qi of the world was sucked dry. However, at this moment, a figure suddenly appeared behind Daoist Wuyang. It opened its mouth wide and swallowed him as well. Moreover, the suction force was much stronger than the power of the Black Impermanence, and it also carried an extremely strong sense of evil. Daoist Wuyang turned his head and saw the avatar of the hungry ghost Daoist trying to devour him. Daoist Wuyang was instantly shocked. Hungry ghost essence. Daoist Wuyang then said angrily, "Is this how the hungry ghost essence is used? What a waste of God's gift." The techniques of the Shadow Mountain sect mainly focused on the Tao of life and death. Among them, the Tao of death contained many methods to refine ferocious ghosts. However, most of them had been lost. Even if some were not lost, they basically had extremely harsh conditions and could not be easily refined. There were many ways to use the hungry ghost essence. For Chu Xiu to only use it to its most basic effect, what else could it be other than a waste of God's gift? However, Daoist Wuyang did not have time to think so much. In the instant that the hungry ghost realm's incarnation attacked, Daoist Wuyang formed a seal with his hands. Instantly, a large amount of spiritual qi of the world fused into his seal. His aura seemed to have transformed into a giant tree that reached the heavens, constantly growing with boundless vitality. In the instant that the hungry ghost essence devoured Daoist Wuyang and the giant tree, the hungry ghost essence suddenly exploded. The powerful force of life immediately caused it to quickly retreat back into the human puppet, as if it had suffered a great injury. However, at this moment, a blinding Buddhist light suddenly burst out from behind Daoist Wuyang. Daoist Wuyang's black impermanence was directly shattered by Chu Xiu's great art of changing the sun. Chu Xiu himself walked towards Daoist Wuyang, the demonic aura around him condensing into Buddhist light. His aura was vast and powerful, and he directly crushed towards Daoist Wuyang. Chapter 691. Chu Xiu had not expected this Taoist Wuyang to be so strong. Although he had not reached the level of Chu Wuji, he was definitely an expert amongst martial arts masters. Although the Shade Mountain sect's cultivation method was considered by the Daoist lineage to be demonic, they actually cultivated in the orthodox way of life and death, the secret technique of yin and yang. Under the power of the great art of changing sun, Chu Xiu pressed forward step by step. Under that power, all evil spirits and demons were melted and destroyed. Even the ghastly longsword in Daoist Wuyang's hand began to show a crack. Taoist Wuyang's expression changed slightly. With a flick of the horsetail whisk in his left hand, a misty life force bloomed and wrapped around Chu Xiu. Just as Chu Xiu was about to move, the ground suddenly cracked. Towering trees suddenly emerged from the ground, as if they had grown in an instant, brimming with life force. Chu Xiu's figure moved, using the heaven's sun-gazing at air technique. As long as there was any movement on the ground, he would be able to dodge in advance. Interesting. A strange look appeared in Chu Xiu's eyes. The Shade Mountain sect's cultivation method was truly interesting. It could actually fuse life and death into one. Taoist Wuyang's move was clearly a sign that he had studied the power of life force to its limits. Chu Xiu had once heard Mei Qinglian describe the Shade Mountain sect in detail. It was said that when the Shade Mountain sect was still a Daoist lineage, he had once performed this move in front of everyone. With a wave of his hand, a small sapling would grow into a towering tree. Once a seed fell to the ground, it would instantly grow into a fruitful fruit tree. Passers-by could pluck it, and people would even worship him as if he were an immortal. However, this move of Taoist Wuyang's was not a performance. It was a genuine killing move. Using his own strength to forcefully grow so many trees, Taoist Wuyang's originally unsightly face now turned even paler. Most importantly, the densely packed trees did not even touch the side of Chu Xiu. Just as everyone thought that Daoist Wuyang's strength was lacking, Daoist Wuyang suddenly formed a hand seal and spat out a single word: suppress. In an instant, countless towering trees blossomed with the brilliance of the formation and connected into one. Chu Xiu happened to be at the very center of the formation. Even Chu Xiu himself did not expect that he would fall into Daoist Wuyang's trap. His opponent knew that he could dodge his giant tree, but he still did so. In the end, he forced him to the center of the formation, where he had to bear the most pressure. In an instant, the array formation exploded. The towering trees began to wither and finally exploded. The ultimate life force was death. The moment the formation exploded, the entire divine martial gate trembled. The power was so strong that it could kill most of the martial Dao grandmasters in an instant. Daoist Wuyang let out a long sigh. In truth, he had no intention of killing Chu Xiu. After all, he and Chu Xiu were both in charge of the subduing martial hall. It would be hard to explain himself to His Majesty if he were to kill each other for the sake of an outsider from the gate of divine might. Therefore, if Chu Xiu had given him the slightest bit of face, this matter would have been easily resolved. However, this Chu Xiu was stubborn and refused to budge, shedding all pretenses of cordiality the moment they met. In that case, he could not be blamed for being ruthless. Although Daoist Wuyang had caused such a huge commotion, those who were on Chu Xiu's side, be it Mei Qinglian or Tangya, were not worried. They had followed Chu Xiu for such a long time and had witnessed countless crises that had befallen Chu Xiu. Even when facing Divine Lord Luo of the Sky Gates, Chu Xiu, a powerhouse at the refinement of true fire realm, had not died. It was basically impossible for Daoist Wuyang to kill Chu Xiu. Indeed, in the next moment, there were some changes in the array formation that had exploded. A shocking power emerged and the power of the array formation's explosion began to disperse to both sides. A flash of saber light bloomed and the extreme sharpness of the saber caused many of the warriors present to be unable to open their eyes. The terrifying saber fell. The saber intent surged and the saber force surged. The saber force was vast and surging, like a tsunami tearing the heavens and splitting the earth, drowning and devouring all things. Devouring heaven and earth 7 limits, breaking the sea. Chu Xiu rarely used this martial technique. Even when he was at the one with the world realm, Chu Xiu would never use this move unless he was in a critical situation. This saber technique drew upon the power of the heavens and earth. Even powerful existences like the 7-demon saber were created by imitating this saber technique. When Chu Xiu was at the one with the world realm, the backlash from using this saber technique was too great. It was so great that he would no longer be able to fight after using it once. Although the backlash from using it now was not small, at least Chu Xiu now had a basic level of control over it. He would no longer be in such a sorry state like when he was at the one with the world realm. The moment Chu Xiu slashed out with his saber, Daoist Wuyang's expression changed. He could feel the power of this saber. It was an extreme power that could not be blocked. The horsetail whisk in his hand danced wildly, and the power of life, death, and Een blossomed before him. The misty power of life intertwined with the ghostly aura of death, turning into the black and white impermanence, just like the pattern on his Daoist robe. Their heads and tails were connected as they stood in front of him. At the same time, Daoist Wuyang retreated quickly, bursting forth with extreme speed. He ran as far as he could. However, what happened next was beyond everyone's expectations. When Chu Xiu's saber descended, it was not aimed at the panicking Daoist Wuyang, but at Yan Huainan, who was still fighting with Mei Qinglian. When the saber descended, even Yan Huainan himself did not realize that Chu Xiu's target was actually him. Mei Qinglian's figure moved, and the black fog dissipated. In a flash, her figure had already appeared several tens of feet away. Yan Huainan was suddenly faced with the power of Chu Xiu's saber. Between life and death, Yan Huainan let out an enraged roar. Boundless qi and blood burst forth from his body as he tried to block the attack with all his might. However, in his haste, it was all for naught. The name of the sea-cleaving saber was not an exaggeration. It truly possessed the power to cleave through the sea. It was a mighty power that no human could touch. Everything dissipated under that saber strike. Yan Huainan's body was cleaved into two, and he fell to the ground with a loud crash. A fissure began to extend beneath the feet of his corpse, spanning several hundred feet. At the end of the fissure, many palaces collapsed with a loud rumble. Everyone present was immediately dumbfounded. They had never imagined that things would end up like this. Chu Xiu and Daoist Wuyang were in a heated battle, but in the end, Yan Huainan had been killed. What was going on? A hint of anger appeared on Daoist Wuyang's face, and the power of the black and white impermanence before him dissipated. Chu Xiu's actions made him feel like he had been played. However, at that moment, before the others could make a move, a slightly pale Chu Xiu suddenly appeared in front of Yan Tingting, who was still in a daze. Yan Tingting's eyes were filled with intense hatred as she looked at Chu Xiu. However, before she could say a single word, Chu Xiu stretched out his hand like lightning and grabbed her neck. After strangling her to death, he threw her to the side. Everyone present shuddered at the sight of this. Previously, they had always heard that Chu Xiu was vicious and merciless, and that he was too ruthless in doing things. However, they had never had a direct understanding of how vicious Chu Xiu was. Now, they finally saw it. Vicious, truly vicious. He was so vicious that he did not even give his opponent a chance to say anything vicious before he died. Daoist Wuyang looked at Chu Xiu and said through gritted teeth, "Chu Xiu. You're very good. We'll see the results in front of His Majesty." After he finished speaking, Daoist Wuyang waved his hand and left with the people of the Shade Mountain sect. Yan Huainan was already dead. What was the point of him fighting to the death with Chu Xiu? Moreover, he had seen Chu Xiu's strength. Whether or not he could defeat Chu Xiu, it was impossible for him to kill Chu Xiu. However, he had planned for such a long time. He was about to make Yan Huainan bring the entire divine martial sect to join the subduing martial hall and become his subordinates. However, Chu Xiu had messed up his plans. This matter was definitely not over. Chu Xiu glanced at the surroundings. The disciples of the divine martial sect who had been besieging Tangya and the others had already fled in all directions. When the people from the martial arts circle saw Chu Xiu's gaze, they subconsciously took a step back. A chill rose from the bottom of their hearts. Chu Xiu did not say much. He just waved his hand and left with Tangya and the others. It was not that he did not want to destroy the divine martial sect along the way, but it was purely an accident that he had brought too few people with him. After all, the divine martial sect had tens of thousands of disciples in the inner and outer sections. It was basically impossible for him to destroy the divine martial sect with only a dozen people. Even tens of thousands of pigs would not stand there and let him catch them. Moreover, after using the sea-cleaving saber, Chu Xiu had consumed too much energy. It was not appropriate for him to attack again for the time being. In order to prevent accidents, it was better for him to go back and recuperate for a while. In less than half a day, the news that Chu Xiu had killed Yan Huainan in the divine martial sect had spread throughout the northern Yan martial arts circle, causing everyone to be shocked. Yan Huainan was not like Fang Datong, who was ranked in the top 50 on the ranking list. The divine martial sect was also one of the 7 sects and 8 schools because of him. However, he had died at the hands of Chu Xiu. This was somewhat shocking. Moreover, those who knew the cause and effect of this matter could not say anything to Chu Xiu. After all, it was the divine martial sect who had poisoned Chu Xiu in the beginning. In the end, the despicable method did not work, and they deserved to be killed instead. Even the great Guangming Temple could not find any fault with this. Although it was not Yan Huainan who had poisoned Yan Huainan, what was the difference between poisoning your daughter and poisoning you? However, even though it was like this, everyone was still shocked by Chu Xiu's strength and viciousness. This fellow was simply like a malefic star. Wherever he went, he would kill, and he especially liked to send people off on some joyous occasions. Originally, some of the martial arts circles were preparing to hold birthday parties or celebrations. However, after this incident, all of them were cancelled. Chapter 692. In the dim hall, Xiang Long looked angrily at Daoist Wuyang and Chu Xiu below. "I handed the martial suppression hall to you, and this is how you repay me? Killing each other? The others haven't done anything yet, but you're already fighting each other, making a joke out of yourselves. One of you is a sect master, and the other is the successor of the Yinma clan. Both of you are martial arts masters. Don't you have any sense of the bigger picture?" Following Xiang Long's angry shout, Daoist Wuyang explained, "Your Majesty, please understand. This humble Daoist has been quietly instigating Yan Huainan to rebel against us. In the end, just as I was about to succeed, this Chu Xiu suddenly intervened and caused the matter to fail. This Chu Xiu is clearly using his position to take revenge. Chu Xiu said indifferently, I'm using my position to take revenge? What a joke. You and I are both from the Martial Suppression Hall, but when did you tell me about your actions against Yan Huainan? Yan Huainan was one of the participants when the Northern Yan formed the demon-slaying alliance. Why? Is it wrong for me to find trouble with him now? Daoist Wuyang snorted coldly and said, then why did you still try to kill Yan Huainan after I showed up? Chu Xiu did not budge an inch. What a joke. Yan Huainan wanted to kill me. He wanted to kill me, so I killed him. What's wrong with that? The one who killed you is Yan Huainan's daughter, not Yan Huainan. Alright then. I'll send someone to poison Daoist Wuyang with the gut-severing parasite and then kill that person to give you an explanation. Then, this matter will have nothing to do with me, right? You're twisting words and forcing logic. As Chu Xiu and Daoist Wuyang argued, their anger grew. If it weren't for the fact that they were in the Imperial Palace, they would have easily picked up their weapons and fought each other. Shut up, both of you. Xianglong shouted angrily and said, alright, let's forget about this matter for now. Both of you take a step back and don't look for trouble with each other. If I find out that the two of you are doing this again, I will definitely punish you severely. With that, Xianglong waved his sleeves and chased both of them out. After Chu Xiu and Daoist Wuyang left, the fury on Xianglong's face suddenly disappeared. The speed at which his expression changed was unimaginable. An old eunuch hidden in the shadows stood behind Xianglong and said in a low, hoarse voice, did His Majesty let them go so easily? The people of the pugilistic world are the people of the pugilistic world. They have no rules, and their wild nature is hard to tame. Xianglong waved his hand and said, no matter. The matters of the pugilistic world should be settled by the people of the pugilistic world. Otherwise, why would we invite Daoist Wuyang and Chu Xiu here? I don't care about the process, I only care about the results. No matter how fiercely they fight, as long as they don't threaten the interests of the Northern Yan, it's fine. Eunuch Han, have there been any changes in the pugilistic world since the establishment of the Jianghu Hall? Eunuch Han thought about it and said, the changes are quite big. At present, the Great Light Temple and other top Northern Yan sects have been attracted to West Chu. With Chu Xiu taking control of the Giant Spirit Gang and annexing more than 10 Northern Yan pugilistic world forces, the other pugilistic world forces are all in danger and don't dare to be too insolent. Xianglong waved his hand and said, isn't that enough? Who cares if they fight to the death? As long as they can subdue the Northern Yan pugilistic world, that's enough. The Shenwu Gate is a big Northern Yan sect and usually doesn't accept the imperial rule. Whether Yan Huainan dies or submits, it's beneficial to the imperial court of the Northern Yan. If that's the case, why should we care so much? Eunuch Han lowered his head and didn't say much. His Majesty's thoughts were not something he could casually guess. In short, if His Majesty thinks it's good, then it must be good. After leaving the palace, Chu Xiu and Daoist Wuyang both turned around and left on bad terms. Although Xianglong didn't punish anyone in the end, the one who suffered the most was Daoist Wuyang. From the moment Chu Xiu started to attack the Giant Spirit Gang, Daoist Wuyang had already used the item left behind by the Shenwu Gate's ancestor to instigate Yan Huainan to defect. He was just one step away from success, but in the end, Chu Xiu ruined it. This was quite unbearable. After returning to the Jianghu Hall, Chu Xiu sorted out the recent affairs of the Jianghu Hall in detail. There was nothing special that needed to be dealt with. The Great Light Temple's attention was no longer on the Northern Yan side. Other sects like the Huangfu clan and the Northern Fluttering Snow City were also playing it safe and didn't come looking for trouble. Therefore, Chu Xiu was also preparing to head to Wei Prefecture. Chu Xiu didn't bring too many people with him during his trip to Wei Prefecture. He only brought along Tang Ye and a dozen of his trusted subordinates with decent strength. As for Mei Qinglian, she stayed behind in the Jianghu hall. Mei Qinglian wasn't interested in things like sword arts. She just instructed Chu Xiu to not forget to give her a share if he obtained any good stuff. In Wei Prefecture's Tongzhou Prefecture, Chu Xiu was walking on the streets of the Tongzhou Prefecture with a rather complicated mood. This was the place where he started his career and also the place where he had to conceal many secrets. For example, his cheap father's identity as a dragon rider Imperial Guard. Even if it was found out, he didn't have to worry. With Chu Xiu's current status and identity, he didn't have to be afraid of what the Eastern Qi Imperial Court would do. Moreover, he had a good relationship with the second prince of Eastern Qi. According to Chu Xiu's information before he arrived, Azure Water Sword sect had been completely destroyed. Lu Gongyuan was dead, Shenbai was dead, and Dou Guangchen led a group of Azure Water Sword sect elites to die in the hands of Chu Xiu in the Xiaofan heaven. The entire Azure Water Sword sect was completely ruined. It could be said that the entire Azure Water Sword sect's downfall was definitely related to Chu Xiu. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he single-handedly destroyed Azure Water Sword sect. Now that Azure Water Sword sect was one of the 7 sects and 8 factions that were eliminated, it was rather simple for Chu Xiu to visit and interrogate them. But when Chu Xiu brought his men to the Azure Water Sword sect's mountain gate, he felt something was amiss. There were too many people at the foot of Azure Water Sword sect's mountain. A dense crowd of martial artists were gathered here. From the looks of it, there were not only Northern Yan martial artists, but also Eastern Qi martial artists. Seeing this scene, Chu Xiu immediately frowned. What happened to Azure Water Sword sect? Why did so many people come? But when the others saw Chu Xiu coming, they were even more surprised than Chu Xiu. It's Chu Xiu. He actually came here too. That's not surprising. After all, Chu Xiu was the one who killed Azure Water Sword sect's Shenbai. It's normal for him to discover something. I heard that Chu Xiu ran amok in the northern Yan land and killed so many people that blood flowed like a river. Is there any brother from the northern Yan land who can tell us about the situation? Amidst the crowd's discussion, Chu Xiu walked straight to the Azure Water Sword sect's mountain gate. When he reached the peak, he realized there were even more martial artists here, and they were all from the major sections. Most of them were from the sword sects, with the 5 major sword sects as the leaders. Chu Xiu could recognize quite a few of them. Among them were Concealed Sword Villa's Edgeless Sword, Cheng Tingfeng, Forgetting Sword Hut's Vacant Sword Han Tingyi. One of them was dressed like a martial artist from Storm Sword Tomb, but Chu Xiu didn't recognize him. Seeing Chu Xiu's arrival, the crowd looked at Chu Xiu and frowned, not showing any good expressions. Right at this moment, a voice suddenly came from behind Chu Xiu. Brother Chu, why are you here? You are a saber user, what are you doing here? Chu Xiu turned around and saw Fang Qishao carrying his sword on his shoulder. On one side of the sword, there was a roasted chicken wrapped in oil paper, and on the other side of the sword hilt were 2 wine gourds. The long sword that 7th young Master Fang was carrying was slightly different from his previous long swords. The hilt and scabbard of the sword were both azure in color and emitted a cold, eerie light. Even before it was unsheathed, one could already feel that it was different. Chu Xiu heard the news before. Because Fang Qishao was promoted to the 2nd rank of the Dragon Tiger rankings, the Sword King City gave the divine weapon, the Divine Sword Awakening Salamander, to Fang Qishao in advance. Chu Xiu looked around and Fang Qishao asked curiously, Brother Chu, what are you looking at? I'm seeing if the rest of the people from Sword King City are here. If they see you insulting the divine sword, they'll probably beat you up so badly that you won't even be able to drink. Fang Qishao chuckled and said, since they gave it to me, it's still my sword even if it's broken. Anyway, it's my sword. I can use it however I want. It's none of their business. As he spoke, Fang Qixiao threw a wine gourd to Chu Xiu and said, I forgot to say this. Congratulations on becoming a martial Dao Grandmaster. Don't forget that at least part of the credit goes to me. Fang Qixiao was talking about the fair fight between him and Chu Xiu when the Eastern Qi alliance besieged him. But in fact, that fight only increased Chu Xiu's understanding of the heaven's sun gazing at air a little. Chu Xiu should thank Divine Lord Luo the most for being able to become a martial Dao Grandmaster. Seeing Chu Xiu looking at him, Fang Qixiao spread his hands and said, Fine, not a part, but at least a little, right? Chu Xiu didn't answer. He just opened the wine gourd and took a sip, saying, Didn't you get punished after returning to Sword King City last time? And why are you here? Didn't the people from Sword King City come with you? Fang Qixiao opened the roasted chicken, broke off a drumstick, and handed it to Chu Xiu, saying, Of course I didn't get punished. Do you think those old guys are willing to punish me? But after you and Zhang Qingzhen stepped into the martial Dao Grandmaster realm consecutively, those old guys are a little anxious. Even if they can't compete with you and Zhang Qingzhen, they can't fall below the third rank. They also know that it is useless to lock me up all day, so they let me out and let me search for opportunities and inspiration to step into the martial Dao Grandmaster realm. Chu Xiu took a glance at Fang Qixiao's hand that was holding the drumstick. He didn't take it but tore off another drumstick from the roasted chicken. Fang Qixiao curled his lips and said, Pretentious. You haven't said, why are you here at Azure Wave Sword Sect? Also, what are these guys doing here? Chu Xiu took a bite of the drumstick and looked at Cheng Tingfeng and the others. Fang Qixiao asked in surprise, why? Aren't you here for the treasure left behind by Azure Wave Sword Sect? It is said that Shenbai obtained that treasure, which is why he has the strength to challenge you. Hearing this, Chu Xiu immediately frowned and subconsciously exerted force in his hand. The drumstick was shattered by the trace of Dipper Qi that he accidentally leaked out. Fang Qixiao curled his lips again and said, What a waste of food. Chapter 693. Regarding the Azure Water Sword Sect and Shenbai's matter, Chu Xiu thought that no one else noticed. But the truth was as such. After that incident, the Azure Water Sword Sect was never safe and sound. Why did it seem like everyone knew about this matter now? After Chu Xiu asked Fang Qixiao, he finally understood what was going on. This made Chu Xiu have the urge to curse. At the start, no one noticed the secret of the Azure Water Sword Sect's back mountain and no one paid attention to it. In fact, the one who leaked this secret was the Azure Water Sword Sect itself. After Shenbai's death, the Azure Water Sword Sect was like a group of dragons without a leader. They didn't even have a sect master. The older generation of disciples were all dead, and the elite disciples of the middle generation followed Do Guangqin and died in the hands of Chu Xiu. Hence, the Azure Water Sword Sect was only left with some of the weaker disciples. Even though the Azure Water Sword Sect was removed from the 7 sects and 8 factions, but in the eyes of some people, it still had some value. For example, the Azure Water Sword Sect's mountain was actually not bad and was a treasured land. Hence, there were some forces from the Wei County and even the northern Yan and eastern Qi regions that invaded the Azure Water Sword Sect in hopes of seizing the Azure Water Sword Sect. The remaining Azure Water Sword Sect disciples panicked. Facing the hungry wolves, they started to threaten them. No one knew who said it, but the Azure Water Sword Sect still had a trump card. It was their back mountain ancestral ground. As long as they walked out of it, they would definitely achieve great success. Shenbai was an example. If they were provoked, they would let the ancestors who were in seclusion in the ancestral ground to kill them all. This news was initially used to scare people. It was half true and half false, but it did scare off a lot of people. These disciples didn't know the true secret of the Azure Water Sword Sect, but they were still members of the Azure Water Sword Sect and had heard of some legends. Moreover, Shenbai's seclusion couldn't be hidden from others. However, when this news completely spread to the ears of some people, they felt that something was wrong. If the Azure Water Sword sect really had such an ancestral ground, why didn't anyone cultivate Shenbai's sword skills? Previously, they all thought that it was Shenbai's fated encounter alone, but from the looks of it now, could it be that the fated encounter was still within the Azure Water Sword sect? The words of these Azure Water Sword sect disciples might be half true and half false, but through the clues in their words, they were able to deduce something. The Azure Water Sword sect was probably hiding some good stuff. That was why the various sects, especially the sword sects, had sent people to investigate. Regardless of whether it was true or not, at the very least, there had to be some results. That was how the scene he was seeing now had come to an end. After understanding all of this, Chu Xiu was also rather depressed. He was still too late. If he had acted earlier, the secret of the Azure Water Sword sect would have been monopolized by him. In fact, from the start, Chu Xiu had already sensed that something was wrong with Shenbai and the Azure Water Sword sect. It was just that he had sent people to scout for information, and the Azure Water Sword sect didn't attract the attention of other martial artists. In addition, Xiang Long from the northern Yen side was pressuring him. That was why he was prepared to settle things with the northern Yen side before coming to Wei County. He didn't expect the news to be leaked. Fang Qi Shao, who was at the side, saw that Chu Xiu's expression wasn't looking good. He decisively didn't say anything else and just drank his wine. In the past, with his strength, he could still exchange a few moves with Chu Xiu, but now he really couldn't beat him. It was better not to talk too much, or else he might get beaten up. But he didn't say anything. Chu Xiu instead asked, "Then what is the situation now? Has anyone found the Azure Water Sword sect's so-called treasure?" Fang Qi Shao shook his head and said, "If one faction came, then they would definitely find it. But now that so many factions have come, you have also seen it. Everyone wants to monopolize it, but the result is a stalemate here. In the beginning, only the Forgetting Sword Hut and Storm Sword Tomb came first, but the longer they dragged it out, the more people came. Let's see, if this drags on, who knows how many more people will come." In fact, when they saw Chu Xiu coming, the factions already felt that they couldn't drag it out any longer. If this dragged on, there really wouldn't be enough. But everyone was still thinking, what should they do in this situation? Just as they were pondering, there were quite a number of people who also followed up the mountain. They were all Eastern Qi, Northern Yen, and other nearby factions. Among them, there were also people from the Shanyang Mo clan. Seeing Chu Xiu, Mo Tianlin came over with some guilt and said, "Brother Chu, last time I wasn't able to persuade the patriarch to help, I am sorry." Chu Xiu waved his hand and said, "Brother Mo doesn't need to take it to heart. You already helped me a lot by not letting the Mo clan hit me when I was down. People in the pugilistic world can't help themselves. I understand." As he spoke, Chu Xiu pointed to Fang Qi Shao, who was still gnawing on the roast chicken, and said, "Look at him, he doesn't have any sense of guilt. In this life, you don't have to let anyone down, as long as you don't let yourself down, that is enough." Fang Qi Shao wiped the oily corners of his mouth and raised his head in a daze. Why was he involved again? "Brother Mo, do you want to have a bite?" Tongzhou Prefecture's honey roast chicken, the taste is very good. Fang Qi Shao offered his half-eaten roast chicken forward. Mo Tianlin took a step back, shook his head decisively, and said, "No need, Brother Fang, you can enjoy it yourself." In fact, among these people, only the seemingly indifferent Chu Xiu and the seemingly unruly Fang Qi Shao understood what was going on. During the battle, Fang Qi Shao understood that he was friends with Chu Xiu, so he did his best to help Chu Xiu. Even if he didn't do his best, he had a clear conscience and was extremely benevolent. At the very least, he didn't let down his own conscience. After all, he was a disciple of Sword King City and had been nurtured by Sword King City. He couldn't risk his life for Chu Xiu or even betray the sect. Fang Qixiao had done everything he could, and that was enough. So when he saw Chu Xiu again, he felt very natural. Although Sword King City didn't have a good relationship with Chu Xiu, it didn't prevent Fang Qixiao from continuing to treat Chu Xiu as a friend. Chu Xiu looked at Mo Tianlin and said, "Didn't your Mo family send a martial Dao Grandmaster this time?" Mo Tianlin shook his head and said, "My Mo family isn't strong, and the only martial Dao Grandmaster is the family's old ancestor. He won't participate in this kind of occasion. So, my Mo family only sent a few oneness of heaven and man cultivators. They're mainly here to watch the show. I just broke through, so I wanted to come out to relax and consolidate my cultivation." Chu Xiu had already noticed that Mo Tianlin had also stepped into the oneness of heaven and man realm. It might not be easy for Mo Tianlin to step into the oneness of heaven and man realm at his age, but in front of Chu Xiu and Fang Qixiao, he really couldn't be proud. "Are the members of the 5 major sword sects here?" Chu Xiu looked at Fang Qixiao and asked. Fang Qixiao wiped his mouth and said, "More or less." After all, the sword skill that Shunbai displayed back then was indeed extraordinary. If that inheritance is truly in the Azure Water Sword sect, it is still worth a trip. Therefore, Storm Sword Tomb, Forgetful Sword Hut, and Concealed Sword Villa each sent a Grandmaster. I just happened to be nearby, so the sect sent me here. What Fang Qixiao meant was that he might be at the oneness of heaven and man realm, but he was comparable to a martial Dao Grandmaster. Of course, when Fang Qixiao said this, he was just narrating and not showing off. To Fang Qixiao, he might show off his wit, his handsomeness, but he wouldn't show off his strength. What he said earlier was just a fact. The members of the Yunu Palace didn't come? Chu Xiu was astonished. Fang Qixiao shook his head and said, "Who knows? The Yunu Palace has been declining for the past few years. That woman, Lin Fengya, has a stubborn personality. The other 5 major sword sects don't wish to have any dealings with her. Seeing that she is a woman, we don't wish to lower ourselves to her level. Yan Fian isn't bad. That woman isn't easy to deal with either. She might be beautiful, but her strength is lacking. I reckon she won't come." Although Yan Fian was also ranked in the top 10 of the Longhu leaderboard and had also reached the oneness of heaven and man realm, her strength was clearly still lacking compared to an existence at Fang Qixiao's level. On the other hand, Fang Qixiao and Zhong Xian already had the strength to fight a martial Dao Grandmaster head-on. At this moment, Fang Qixiao suddenly thought of something. He suddenly said, "But I heard a rumor from the other disciples of Sword King City. They said that brother Lu Fengxian is together with that woman, Yan Fian." Chu Xiu was stunned, then he shook his head and said, "Impossible. With the Yunu Palace's rules, Yan Fian won't be with anyone." Back then, Ing Bailu pursued Yan Fian, but she didn't agree. How could she be with brother Lu now? Do you think she's a woman who can put aside her reason for love? Chu Xiu didn't say this because he doubted Lu Fengxian's strength and charm. He just didn't believe that Yan Fian would be with a man, even if that man was a young talent like Lu Fengxian, who had a limitless future. In Yan Fian's heart, the most important thing would always be the sect. Back then, Ing Bailu had pursued her for a long time and was extremely infatuated with her. In the end, Yan Fian still cruelly rejected him. From this point, one could see Yan Fian's thoughts and character. But now, Fang Qixiao said that Lu Fengxian was with Yan Fian. This was a bit ridiculous. Although in Chu Xiu's opinion, Lu Fengxian's future achievements might even surpass Ing Bailu's, in the eyes of others, the current Ing Bailu was undoubtedly far more outstanding than Lu Fengxian. Fang Qixiao chuckled and said, "Who can say for sure about something like love?" Chu Xiu glanced at him and said, "What do you know about love? Besides coming into contact with women in brothels, when have you ever touched a woman?" Fang Qixiao wanted to refute, but he was really speechless by Chu Xiu's words. In all fairness, although Fang Qishao wasn't considered handsome, he wasn't ugly either. In addition, he was the successor of Sword King's city and a top swordsman of the younger generation. He should be very popular with women. However, his mouth was really too damaging to his image. Basically, no woman was willing to chat with him. They would be angered to death. Mo Tianlin sighed and said, "I ask the world what love is." Before he could finish his sentence, Chu Xiu said indifferently, "I'm more familiar with this poem than you are. Also, didn't you get dumped by a woman? Do you understand what is called emotion and what is love?" Mo Tianlin was also speechless by Chu Xiu's words. However, he suddenly saw something. He suddenly pointed down the mountain and said in surprise, "Brother Chu, look." Chapter 694. Chu Xiu was still discussing the matter of Lu Fengxian and Yan Fian with Fang Qishao and Mo Tianlin when a group of people came up the mountain. Most of them were sword-wielding women. They were Yan Fian and the Yunu Palace's martial artists. There was only one man, Lu Fengxian. Seeing this, Chu Xiu frowned slightly. Was it true? At this time, Lu Fengxian also saw Chu Xiu and the others. He immediately came over and greeted them with a smile, "Brother Chu, Brother Fang, Brother Mo, you're early." After greeting each other, Chu Xiu looked at the Yunu Palace's people and said to Lu Fengxian, "Brother Lu, you're together with Miss Yan?" Lv Fengxian nodded naturally and said, "Yes." To Lu Fengxian, it was normal for a man and a woman to be in love. He just had to admit it openly. Chu Xiu frowned and said, "But what about the Yunu Palace's rules? You should know that the Yunu Palace's disciples will never marry outside, not to mention that Yan Fian is the next successor of the Yunu Palace." Lu Fengxian smiled and said, "I know this. That's why Fian said that she's only with me in name now. After she helps the Yunu Palace overcome their difficulties and chooses a suitable successor, she will let the Yunu Palace expel her from the sect. Then she will be with me officially and marry me." Hearing Lu Fengxian say this, not only Chu Xiu, but also Fang Qishao and Mo Tianlin at the side frowned. "Then during this time, you've been helping Yan Fian in the Yunu Palace?" Lu Fengxian nodded and said, "The Yunu Palace's palace mistress Lin Fengya has yet to recover from her injuries. Some shameless and filthy people wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to bully the women, but I stopped them." "What about Shui Wuxiang and the others? He's not with you?" "I asked them to stay at the Yumaiden Palace to help out. It just so happens that the 5 major sword sects are participating in the Azure Water Sword Sects incident. Palace Mistress Lin isn't able to come, and Fei Yan's strength isn't enough. Hence, I accompanied her." Everyone chatted here for a while. The Yunu Palace seemed to have something to discuss, so Lu Fengxian was called back by Yan Fian. Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows and said, "Everyone, what do you think?" Fang Qishao snorted lightly and said, "I'll see with my own eyes. In any case, I don't believe that woman Yan Fian would let her sect expel her from the Yunu Palace for a man. Moreover, with her talent and strength, would the Yunu Palace let her go?" Mo Tianlin just smiled bitterly and said, "Could it be that love can really make people dizzy? Brother Liu doesn't seem to be an irrational person." Chu Xiu didn't say anything. He felt that Lu Fengxian's behavior was very normal. In fact, Lu Fengxian was good in every aspect, but she was too gullible. Chu Xiu firmly believed that humans were evil by nature, so he would often use the greatest evil to speculate on a person. But Lu Fengxian was the exact opposite. He believed that humans were good by nature. As long as you didn't reveal any evil intentions towards him, he would treat you with the greatest sincerity. In the original storyline, Lu Fengxian was deceived by Nie Donglu. In the end, if it wasn't for Lu Fengxian's astounding luck and opportunities, she would probably have been tricked to death. It was the same now. Chu Xiu might not be able to say that Yan Fian was tricking Lu Fengxian, but in his opinion, this matter definitely wasn't that simple. The Yu Palace was currently in a state of decline. Lin Fengya was injured. Although Yan Fian's strength wasn't bad, it was only not bad. It was far from the level of a martial Dao Grandmaster. But Lu Fengxian was different. With an unparalleled divine weapon and Lu Wenho's inheritance, he could completely rival a martial Dao Grandmaster. With Lu Fengxian around, he could help the Yu Palace tide over this crisis for the time being. At this moment, Mo Tianlin suddenly said doubtfully, if Yan Fian was using Brother Liu, then why didn't she go finding Bailu? Be it in terms of strength or background, Bailu is above Brother Liu. Actually, strength aside, the two of them hadn't fought directly before. But in terms of background, the Xianxia clan definitely had an advantage over Lu Fengxian, who was all alone. If Yan Fian only wanted to use Lu Fengxian to tide over the Yu Palace's crisis, then Bailu was actually a better choice than Lu Fengxian. After all, the former had been in love with Yan Fian for a long time. He didn't even need to show up. As long as the Xianxia clan said the word, those rascals would naturally retreat. Chu Xiu shook his head and said, I don't know. But although Brother Liu and I are friends, it's not good to say much at this time. Let's see how things develop. Sometimes, it was because they were friends that they couldn't say much. Now, if Chu Xiu rushed over to Lu Fengxian and said that this woman definitely had ulterior motives, then they probably wouldn't even be friends anymore. At this moment, there were more and more people gathering at the foot of the mountain. If this dragged on, there might be more people coming. Han Tingyi from the Forgetful Sword Hut was the first to speak. Everyone, let's not delay anymore. No one knows if the Azure Water Sword sect has any treasures or inheritances. If this drags on, even if there are any treasures, there won't be enough for the future generations to share. Everyone present nodded. A monk fetching water to eat. If there were more monks, there wouldn't be any water to eat. After everyone present reached a consensus, they directly knocked on the Azure Water Sword sect's mountain gate. There were currently over 100 disciples standing guard within the Azure Water Sword sect. When the others saw so many people from the major sects ascending the mountain and looking at them covetously, they were all scared off. These 100 disciples could be said to be the disciples who were truly loyal to the Azure Water Sword sect. They were still guarding the sect. With so many martial Dao masters present, one of them who was only in his 20s and had the strength of the Xiantian realm stood out with a resolute expression. I know that all of you are coveting the treasures of my Azure Water Sword sect's ancestral grounds. With my strength, I am just like an ant in front of all the martial Dao masters. But I dare not forget the kindness of teaching, and cannot abandon the sect. If you want to seize my Azure Water Sword sect's treasures, then you have to step over my dead body first. The major sects had their own heritage. To be able to be ranked among the top sects in the pugilistic world didn't only depend on the strength of the sect master, but also the heritage and spirit of the major sections. Just like the Azure Water Sword sect in front of them. Lu Gongyuan, Shenbai, Dou Guangchen, and the other upper echelons of the Azure Water Sword sect were all dead. The entire Azure Water Sword sect was eliminated from the pugilistic world, and the Azure Water Sword sect only existed in name. But even so, these disciples were still willing to guard the Azure Water Sword sect until the very last moment. This was the heritage of the major sections. Everyone present frowned and felt that this was a little troublesome. This disciple was right. In front of these martial Dao masters from the major sects, they were indeed no different from ants, and could easily crush them to death. But killing and seizing treasures wasn't a nice thing to say. After all, they were all righteous sects, and yet they did such a thing. No matter how one looked at it, it would still affect the reputation of the sect. They originally thought that once they arrived, these Azure Water Sword sect disciples would definitely be panic-stricken and open the door to welcome them, or they would immediately disperse. They didn't expect that there would be people among them who were so stubborn. Seeing this scene, Chu Xiu laughed and said, "You want to be a whore and also build a chastity. You all want the treasures, yet you are afraid of dirtying your own hands. Aren't you hypocritical?" Han Tingyi and the others all glared at Chu Xiu. Hidden Sword Village Cheng Tingfeng angrily said, "Chu Xiu, you are an evil Dao cultivator and you have the nerve to say such words?" When the Eastern Qi Alliance attacked Guanzhong, Cheng Tingfeng's elder brother, who was also the Hidden Sword Villa's villa master, Cheng Tingshan, was severely injured by Chu Xiu. The enmity between the two parties wasn't small. Chu Xiu said indifferently, "Why should I be embarrassed? If I want to snatch something, I will snatch it openly. Unlike you guys who are so hesitant and pretentious." Cheng Tingfeng still wanted to say something, but he was stopped by Han Tingyi. Now that Chu Xiu was willing to step forward and be the bad guy, they were happy to see it happen. Anyway, Chu Xiu's name in the pugilistic world was already notorious enough. It wasn't a big deal to be even more notorious. At this moment, seeing Chu Xiu step forward, the Azure Water Sword sect's disciples all revealed a complicated hatred in their eyes. Chu Xiu had a feud with their Azure Water Sword sect since a long time ago. Including the current annihilation of the Azure Water Sword sect, a part of it was caused by Chu Xiu. Of course, some people also thought that if Shunbai didn't have a feud with Chu Xiu, then even if Shunbai couldn't master the sect origin swords, Dou Guangchen and the others wouldn't have to die. Lu Gongyuan wouldn't have died so early. With Shunbai's talent, it was only a matter of time before he broke through to the martial Dao master. Azure Water Sword sect wouldn't be as miserable as it was now. However, there were no ifs. The current state of the Azure Water Sword sect was inseparable from Chu Xiu. Furthermore, Chu Xiu's infamy had long spread throughout the pugilistic world. Others might be concerned about their reputation, but Chu Xiu didn't care. He would really kill someone. So after seeing Chu Xiu step forward, even the originally firm disciples couldn't help but tremble at this moment. Looking at everyone present, Chu Xiu spoke indifferently, "Do all of you want to be buried with the Azure Water Sword sect? I don't think so. Most of you are probably being coerced. Being afraid of death isn't something shameful. You only have one life. The Azure Water Sword sect is already gone. What's the point of you dying for it? Now, I will give you a chance." As he spoke, Chu Xiu waved his hand and circulated his astral qi. The soil and stones on the ground actually formed into the shape of a small house. "Enter it one by one and tell me everything you know. If you tell me, you won't die. But take note, my patience is limited. There are more than 100 of you, but I only wish to spare 50 of you. As for the rest, even if you want to say it, you won't have the chance." As he spoke, Chu Xiu directly pointed out a person. He swept his astral qi and threw him into the small house. With the astral qi wrapping around him, no one knew what he said. Only Chu Xiu could hear it. After a moment, the person was thrown out and Chu Xiu threw the second person in. As more and more people entered, the remaining Azure Water Sword sect disciples were already sweating profusely and were extremely anxious. They didn't even know if the person who entered would be stubborn to the end or if he would spill everything he knew. They also didn't know if there would be any survivors when it was their turn. Humans had a tendency to blindly follow. Everyone wasn't afraid of death. With this courage, even if they were afraid of death, they wouldn't say it out loud. But once they were separated into individuals, that suspicion would appear in everyone's heart. Chapter 695. Chu Xiu's move was very effective, at least to those unyielding Azure Billow Sword sect disciples. As the number of people decreased, the remaining people immediately broke down. Some of the disciples even cried out and took the initiative to rush forward. "I will speak. I know all the secrets of the Azure Billow Sword sect." Chu Xiu casually waved his hand. "All right, I know what I need to know. I don't need anyone to lead the way. Those who stay here, bear the consequences. As Chu Xiu's voice faded, all the Azure Billow Sword sect martial artists fled, leaving only the first martial artist who stood out. Everyone looked at each other. Chu Xiu's move was indeed vicious. No one was truly unafraid of death. He had thoroughly understood the human heart and toyed with it to the extreme. Chu Xiu looked at the only martial artist who didn't leave and spoke indifferently, "Why aren't you leaving? Are you really not afraid of death?" That young martial artist laughed bitterly, "Afraid, extremely afraid. But the news of the Azure Billow Sword sect's ancestral ground having a secret treasure was leaked by me. I also didn't expect that this half-true half-false rumor would actually attract so many people to spy on me. I have let down the ancestor, how can I still have the face to escape?" As his voice faded, that young martial artist actually slammed his palm towards his own heart meridian, committing suicide on the spot. His actions could be considered as atonement. Originally, the Azure Billow Sword sect could still leave behind a trace of inheritance. But with his actions, the Azure Billow Sword sect's lineage would be completely annihilated. In fact, among the people present, no matter if it was those from the large sects who cared about their reputation or the vicious and merciless Chu Xiu, as long as these disciples didn't obstruct them and obediently cooperated, they wouldn't kill the innocent. But the news of the Azure Billow Sword sect having a secret treasure had already spread out. At the foot of the mountain, there was still a dense crowd of rogue martial artists waiting to take advantage of the situation. Sooner or later, this news would spread throughout the entire pugilistic world. When the time comes, some of the martial artists in the pugilistic world would think that the Azure Water Sword sect's disciples had a peerless cultivation technique on them. They would definitely use all means to capture them and force out the secret technique. Even though they didn't know if it was true or false, but to the majority of the martial artist factions, it was a wise decision to kill the wrong person instead of letting them go. It was imaginable what kind of miserable state the Azure Water Sword sect would be facing. It was even possible that not a single disciple would be left alive. With no one blocking his path, Chu Xiu headed straight for the back mountains of the Azure Water Sword sect. Just now, some of those disciples were stubborn and didn't say anything, but some of them really told Chu Xiu in detail. Even though no one knew about the situation in the Azure Water Sword sect's back mountain, but these disciples had heard of some true and false gossips after so many years. Chu Xiu more or less understood what was going on. Who would have thought that the Azure Water Sword sect story that seemed like a myth and legend was actually true? But after so many years, there were countless martial artists that entered the Azure Water Sword sect's back mountain for seclusion. Among them were the most outstanding sect leader and disciples of the Azure Water Sword sect. But in the end, only Shunbai was able to successfully cultivate that cultivation technique. It was imaginable how harsh the conditions were. When the others saw Chu Xiu's actions, they all followed suit. Just now, only Chu Xiu was able to force out some information. It was definitely not wrong for them to follow Chu Xiu. The Azure Water Sword sect's back mountain's ancestral ground wasn't huge. According to the disciples, there should be a secret passage in this place. But only the sect leader knew the method to open the secret passage. Now that Lu Gongxian and Shunbai were dead, naturally no one knew the method to open the secret passage. Of course, for a martial artist of Chu Xiu's level, since there was no method to open it, then he would forcefully open it. Chu Xiu took a heavy step forward, and a powerful aura qi instantly seeped into the ground, causing the entire back mountain to tremble. Feeling this power, everyone present had a change in expression. These martial Dao masters present, whether it was Han Tingyi, Cheng Tingfeng, or the martial Dao master of Wind Cloud Sword Tomb, they were all shocked to find that in terms of strength, Chu Xiu, this junior, had completely surpassed them. Among them, the longest had been in the martial Dao master realm for 20 to 30 years, but in terms of strength, they were still inferior to Chu Xiu. Of course, they wouldn't think that they were inferior to Chu Xiu because of this. For a martial artist, strength was only a part of one's strength. This group of Sword Dao experts played with techniques. With strong attainments in Sword Dao, they could even use a portion of their strength to display 100% of their strength. Therefore, whether it was these older generation Sword Dao experts or Feng Qi Shao, they didn't focus on their own strength, but on the comprehension of Sword Dao. At this moment, under Chu Xiu's continuous steps, the ground cracked, and the secret passage that was covered with mechanisms and arrays appeared in front of everyone. Chu Xiu used the Heaven Demon Dance and directly slashed it open. Azure Billow Sword Sect's secret passage wasn't left by that expert in the past, but it was built by the Azure Billow Sword Sect's late ancestors. The arrays in it weren't that powerful, and it couldn't even withstand a few slashes from Chu Xiu. The secret passage shattered, and Chu Xiu entered directly without hesitation. Since this place was built by the Azure Billow Sword Sect's later generations, it meant that there shouldn't be any danger. From the Azure Billow Sword Sect's martial artists, Chu Xiu found out that there were some Azure Billow Sword Sect's disciples who mistakenly entered this place, but nothing happened, so it should be safe. Chu Xiu didn't need others to scout the way, and he directly seized the initiative. Seeing Chu Xiu's actions, the others weren't willing to fall behind and fought to enter the tunnel. Below the tunnel was an extremely deep cave, and when Chu Xiu entered, the first thing he saw was an extremely conspicuous white skeleton. The white skeleton was as white as jade, and even though it was only a white skeleton, it was still emitting an astonishing sword intent. For this white skeleton, the sword intent was already immersed in his bones. Even if there was only a skeleton left, it still had a soaring sword intent. At this moment, Han Tingyi and the others also entered the cave, and the moment they saw the white skeleton, they received a shock that was even greater than Chu Xiu. After all, they were all swordsmen, and they naturally knew how difficult it was to cultivate to this step. This white skeleton must have been a heaven-defying Sword Dao master when it was alive. But just as they were in a daze, Chu Xiu had already made his move. Chu Xiu didn't take a closer look at the cultivation technique engraved under the surrounding walls, but it should be the cultivation technique that Shunbai obtained in the past. Even though Shunbai obtained a sword art, and for Chu Xiu, apart from understanding it by analogy, it wasn't of any direct use. But this was still a top-notch Sword Dao secret technique, and as long as he obtained it, it would be a gain. As the long saber in Chu Xiu's hand slashed down, a large piece of the wall was instantly chopped off, and even the cultivation technique words on it were kept by Chu Xiu into the cyst. Seeing Chu Xiu's action, the others immediately cursed. Everyone knew that Chu Xiu was proficient in saber arts, fists, palms, and many other cultivation techniques, but among the things that he was proficient in, there was no sword art. A saber user came to compete with a group of swordsmen for the Sword Dao secret technique. This behavior of Chu Xiu was purely harming others without benefiting himself. But cursing was just cursing. After seeing Chu Xiu's action, they also hurriedly made a move and began to cut off the cultivation technique on the wall. It didn't matter if they could gather it or not, they had to snatch a portion first. At most, they could just exchange it with others in the future. Even though this underground cave wasn't small, it wasn't big either. It simply couldn't withstand the power of so many martial Dao masters fighting at the same time. Everyone was afraid of directly blasting this underground cave into pieces, and no one would benefit, so they restrained their power. At this moment, Chu Xiu's heart suddenly moved, and he suddenly thought of something. Everyone thought that the most precious thing in this underground cave should be the cultivation technique on the wall. But for so many years, so many people in Azure Billow Sword Sect had seen and cultivated this cultivation technique, but they all failed. Only Shunbai succeeded, and it was imaginable how difficult it was to cultivate this cultivation technique. According to the clues that the Azure Billow Sword Sect's disciples said, even if the expert had become a skeleton, but still had sword chi soaring into the sky, he was the existence that created the Azure Billow Sword Sect. He casually left behind something, and it created one of the 7 sects and 8 schools, the Azure Billow Sword Sect. Even if such a person was really dead, he couldn't be treated as an ordinary corpse. Just like the glazed golden silk goo in Chu Xiu's body, it was refined from the Buddha bones of a Buddhist monk. Therefore, Chu Xiu moved and went straight for the white bones that were emitting sword qi. Everyone present was stunned, and soon after, someone reacted and wanted to stop him, but it was already too late. But just as Chu Xiu was standing in front of the white bones and was about to put it into the secret space box, his astral qi had just touched the white bones, and in an instant, the white sword qi devoured everything, enveloping everyone in the underground cave. When Chu Xiu opened his eyes again, he was already in another world. Surrounding him was a cliff that was overgrown with weeds. Chu Xiu walked to the top of the cliff and looked down. At the bottom of the cliff, there were still a few disciples of the sword hut looking around in a daze. Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows. It seemed that everyone in the cave was swept here, but what was this place? Was it another world, or was it an independent space? This place should have never been discovered by the Azure Billow Sword sect's disciples, but thinking about it, it was normal. According to the Azure Billow Sword sect's disciples, the entire Azure Billow Sword sect was created from the inheritance left behind by this expert. It could be said that his status was even higher than the founder of the Azure Billow Sword sect. Generations of Azure Billow Sword sect martial artists entered the underground cave for life and death seclusion, and they were all extremely respectful to him, not daring to offend him in the slightest. How could they be like Chu Xiu and still want to put him into the secret space box, which was why they never touched the white bones? Thinking of the Azure Billow Sword sect, Chu Xiu suddenly thought of something. He suddenly leaped onto a large tree at the highest point of the cliff and sized up his surroundings. He knew exactly where he was. He was still in the Azure Billow Sword sect, but not the current Azure Billow Sword sect, but the Azure Billow Sword sect from 10,000 years ago, before it was split apart by a sword and formed into the Azure Billow River. Chapter 696. Traveling through time was very mystical. Could that expert's strength be so formidable to such an extent that the method he left behind could allow someone to travel through 10,000 years? Chu Xiu didn't believe it, but everything around him was extremely real. Even Chu Xiu's own strength wasn't suppressed much. The Azure Billow Sword sect 10,000 years ago was much larger than the current Azure Billow Sword sect. It was a giant mountain that was surrounded by cliffs and jagged rocks. Chu Xiu couldn't find any traces of others, let alone traces of that ancient expert. However, Chu Xiu believed that since the other party had left behind such a contingency plan and brought them all here, there must be a deeper meaning behind it. Therefore, Chu Xiu wasn't flustered and was just exploring the mountain leisurely. Along the way, he encountered a few disciples from other sword sects, but when they saw Chu Xiu, they would immediately flee. Chu Xiu was considered to be infamous now. These ordinary disciples were truly fearful when they saw Chu Xiu. But even if they didn't flee, it was fine. Chu Xiu wasn't so bored that he would kill anyone he saw. Right now, on the other side of the cliff, Yan Fian was leading a female disciple to repel a few Hidden Sword Villa disciples. The Yunu Palace and the Hidden Sword Villa had always had some grudges. Even if they didn't find any treasures, both parties still fought because of the verbal conflict. After defeating the disciples of the Hidden Sword Villa alone, Yan Fian sighed as he held his sword. Back when the Yunu Palace was at its peak, the Hidden Sword Villa definitely wouldn't dare to be so arrogant. "Senior sister, are you alright?" When the female disciple behind Yan Fian saw that Yan Fian seemed to be distracted, she couldn't help but worry. The palace mistress was severely injured, and everything in the Yunu Palace was relying on Yan Fian. Standing on the cliff, Yan Fian used her hand to comb her messy hair and shook her head. "I'm fine. Wan, you don't have to worry." The female disciple who spoke was the female disciple Chu Xiu had a conflict with when he first met the Yunu Palace, Wan Er. At that time, Wan Er's attitude was arrogant and willful. Now that several years had passed and the Yu palace was gradually declining, seemed to have matured a lot. Her expression was no longer that arrogant and willful. Looking at Yan Fian, seemed to want to say something, but she held it back. Seeing Er's appearance, couldn't help but frown. What do you want to say? Don't be so hesitant. After a moment of silence, said, Master Lu is a good man. Yan Fian's expression changed, and he said in a low voice, Of course I know he is a good person. No one who is acquainted with Lv Fengxian would say anything bad about him. Wanner hesitated for a moment and said, So, senior sister, isn't it a bit too much to plot against young Master Liu? If you let young Master Liu handle that matter, once something goes wrong, young Master Liu will. Yan Fian turned around and looked at Er. In a deep voice, he said, I know. I know these things even without you telling me. But now, Master is heavily injured. Even with Feng Buping's treatment, the problems that have arisen from her cultivation cannot be healed in a short time. If Master can't handle it, I can't handle it either. Do you want to see the Yu palace be destroyed? But senior sister, you can ask Ying Bailu for help. The Ying clan of Xianxia only needs to use 1/10 of its strength to help the Yu palace get through this crisis. Yan Fian smiled bitterly and rubbed Er's head, Don't be silly. Aristocratic families and top sects won't be controlled by one person. For example, Chu Xiu and Fang Qishao are best friends, but Fang Qishao was still forced to fight Chu Xiu by Sword King City. Ying Bailu will agree to help me, but the Ying clan of Xianxia won't. If something goes wrong, the Yu palace will offend the Ying clan of Xianxia. As the head of the 9 great aristocratic families, the terror of the Ying clan of Xianxia is beyond your imagination. Wanted to say something but was interrupted by Yan Fian. Enough, I know what I'm doing. I've let Lu Fengxian down, but I can't ignore the Yu palace. I owe Lu Fengxian. After the Yu palace gets through this and regains its glory, I'll use my entire life to repay him. But now, I can only say sorry to him. With that, Yan Fian left with But still had a worried look on her face as she followed behind Yan Fian. Her senior apprentice sister used to be rational, but she'd been under too much pressure recently, and had become paranoid. As for the paranoid she'd become more mature because of age or the tempering of the Jianghu. Young Master Lu was a good person. The price of scheming against a good person was obviously lower than scheming against an existence that couldn't be provoked. But her senior apprentice sister had forgotten one thing. Although young Master Lu was indeed a loner compared to Ying Bailu, none of his friends were easy to deal with. Shangyang Mo clan's heir Mo Tianlin, Heaven Alliance's Chenqingdi's disciple Xie Xiaolu, Sword King City's heir Fang Qi Shao, second on the Longhu leaderboard. But these were all secondary. The most terrifying thing was that many people in the Jianghu knew that Chu Xiu and Lu Fengxian had been good friends for many years. Compared to others, they might have to have various forces behind them as a foil, but Chu Xiu didn't. Even without the label of the Hidden Devil clan, Chu Xiu was terrifying enough. Had interacted with Chu Xiu before. When she was young and ignorant, she'd even had a conflict with Chu Xiu, which had left a deep shadow in her heart. If her senior apprentice sister schemed against young Master Lu and really angered Chu Xiu, wouldn't the consequences be better than provoking the Xianxia Ying clan? Didn't know this. She wanted to advise Yan Fian, but unfortunately, Yan Fian wouldn't listen to other people's advice. At this moment, Chu Xiu was heading in the direction of Kanglan River according to his memory. It was said that Kanglan River was formed by a sword slash from that expert in the past. Maybe there would be some clues there. However, before he could reach the place, a thunderous explosion resounded in the air. The clouds and mist in the air dissipated, revealing 2 figures standing within. One of the figures was wearing a blue coarse hemp robe, but his body was straight, and his whole body was filled with a shocking sword essence. As for the other person, he was wearing a blood-red battle armor. His arms were exposed, and there were strange blood-red patterns on the armor. Even his arms were tattooed with those strange patterns, emitting a scorching and violent aura. Without exception, the appearance of these two people couldn't be seen clearly. Their faces seemed to be covered by a thin layer of gauze, and it was impossible to see them clearly. The one in blue should be the sword principal expert from the past, but Chu Xiu felt that the warrior in the battle armor was somewhat familiar. He wasn't familiar with this person, but he was familiar with the aura on him. At this moment, the sword principal expert shook his head and said, "You guys can be good people, but you insist on being watchdogs. How sad is that?" The figure in the battle armor said angrily, "Watchdogs? Do you want to die for insulting the heavenly gates?" Hearing that, Chu Xiu's eyes were instantly filled with terror. The figure in the battle armor was a divine general of the heavenly gates, or the master of the heavenly gates. No wonder Chu Xiu felt that the aura on him was somewhat familiar. Chu Xiu also felt a similar aura on Divine Lord Luo. The sword principal expert actually called the heavenly gates watchdogs, which surprised Chu Xiu. This wasn't a good thing to say. What kind of existence could make the supreme expert of the heavenly gates watchdogs? The sword principal expert said indifferently, "Since you've done it, why don't you let people talk about it? We practice martial arts and cultivate our bodies, and the power we obtain is upright. It's despicable to rely on being watchdogs and groveling to obtain power. The heavenly gates treats others like ants, but you guys are the real ants. You're courting death." The expert from the heavenly gate furiously roared. As his fist descended, the blood-colored patterns on his armor blossomed with a glaring red light. As if they were alive, they densely wrapped around his fist. In an instant, the void collapsed. This fist truly had the power to shatter mountains and rivers. As for the sword principal expert, he was surrounded by a dense amount of sword qi. Each sword qi contained an astonishing sword intent. As he stabbed out with his finger, the sword intent instantly condensed into a huge longsword, slashing across the sky. After breaking the Gate of Heaven expert's punch, it directly cut the entire Mount Azure billow into two. In an instant, the ground cracked, as if an earth dragon was flipping over, and a huge crack appeared on the ground. Previously, it was said that the Zhanglan River was slashed by a sword principal expert. Now, Chu Xiu finally knew that to be precise, the Zhanglan River was slashed by the aftermath of the sword principal expert's sword. As far as Chu Xiu was concerned, no matter if it was the expert in the sword Dao or the expert in the heaven entrance, their strengths had absolutely surpassed the true fire spirit refinement realm, and it was even to the extent that they'd attained the legendary profound attainment realm. Chu Xiu had seen many true fire spirit refinement realm experts, such as the sword principal expert and the heavenly gates expert in the Battle of Mount Fuyu, the experts of the 5 major sword sects, Donghuang Tai and Wei Shuya, and Divine Lord Luo from the heavenly gates. These people were strong, but they definitely couldn't cause such a level of lethality. At that moment, the battle between the two people in midair was so intense that it had even surpassed the level of martial arts. It was as if they had transcended the mortal realm and entered the realm of divinity. They were so strong that even if Chu Xiu raised his heaven's sun gazing at air to the extreme, he still couldn't understand it. However, the only thing Chu Xiu could understand was that the sword principal expert should have had the upper hand, but why was he the one who died in the end? At that moment, the heavenly gates expert was suppressed to the extreme. He roared and took out a box from his arms. He suddenly opened it, and a ray of light bloomed, smashing the sword qi and blasting into the sword principal expert's body, causing him to spit out a mouthful of blood, and directly fall from midair. The blood that the sword principal expert spat out turned into a small sword, as if it had pierced through space, and in the next moment, it actually pierced through the Sky Gates expert. You're tuning in to the Unparalleled Sword Will YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.